Hail to thee, my kindred. I hope you're all having a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, and night, wherever and whenever you are. Holy moly. We've got quite the long video to watch today because we require knowledge, alright? The knowledge, it's important in this case. Because I'll hopefully at some point get down to playing Vampire the Masquerade, and, yesterday we were obviously watching Hunter the Parenting, so there's that whole thing that we're doing. And I thought, why not, Like, if you guys were so willing to recommend this video, and it would help me out in understanding the world of darkness, then it may as well happen. I still don't know whether I'm going to be able to get through this entire thing. It is 3 hours and 10 minutes. I'm willing to make this a 4-hour stream, but, this is a lot of stuff to go through. So we'll most likely watch about half. Yeah, about half. So up until the Anarch Revolt, maybe split this up into 2 pieces. See how that goes. Depends also on how much I decide to talk or not. Because that's also quite, gonna get in the way of things every now and again if I pause a million times. Video is by the Burger Krieg. I almost want to say the Burger King. Good thing I didn't say it like that, because otherwise I would be a little embarrassing. Give that video a like already, because, that's a good thing to do. Let me stretch out a little bit. It's feeling a bit warmer today than it did yesterday. I was gonna pull out my phone to check the temperature. I forgot I have it in front of me. So let me do that real quick. I am a little curious before we get onto the video. I hope you're all doing alright, by the way. Yeah, it's 42. Okay, 42 ain't bad. What was it yesterday? 30-something? Upper 30s? Yeah, upper 30s, I'd say. Put that back in its place so that it doesn't get in the way. None, I see you there. Salutations to you as well. I feel like is there a way to make the text bigger? Let me see. No, I'm just gonna have to pay attention to that other phone. Alright, let's get on to it so that I don't waste time. There's already too much to do. Sorry so much. Hopefully, oh, I almost forgot to check to see if the volume, okay, there we go. It's on now. I almost started playing the video without turning on the volume. That would have been a mistake.
There was Cain. Supposedly, probably, maybe, who knows? Look, the first thing you need to understand is that the history of Vampire the Masquerade is built on a foundation of wet sand. And the sand is made of lies, and it's wet with the blood of all those who believed them. It's not just contradictions created by lore retcons from edition to edition that become a problem. It's contradictions they put in deliberately.
I kind of forgot that that's sort of a thing that happens with these I don't even know what to call them. Stories that go on for too long. It's like, oh yeah, retcons are a thing. So not only, it's kind of like Warhammer a little bit, where not only do you have to worry about retcons, but boom, now you got to worry about like actual, possibly in-lore misleading. Terrible. Hate it 100%. Because then you can never tell what's a retcon and then what's just the authors being goofy, silly individuals who you sometimes want to smack across the head a little bit, just a little smack.
To reflect the various different opinions and perspectives of the vampire world. The elaborate deceptions and propaganda efforts.
Yeah, we're all liars here. Exactly. We all lie. We love lying. Lying is great.
Woven by the elders. And frankly, just the lack of solid evidence interpreted by a handful of eccentric kindred archaeologists and historians. They didn't have no Karl Popper and no Foucault in the vampire world. There was no positivism debate in the Camarilla, and there sure wasn't one in the Sabbat. Most of the things that would count as history books about vampires in the world of darkness are secret. And given that vampires have always tried to remain somewhat hidden in the history of the kind, the mortals, you're never going to find any clear-cut evidence for them there. And the kind don't even believe in vampires. It's a very successful campaign. They could, and they do, describe vampires in ancient history, but they do so thinking they're talking about deities and metaphors. Many official materials have been published diving deep into these secrets, and most of them offer a range of possible answers to the questions those campaigns pose, and encourage folks to come up with their own interesting solutions as well. There's also my own perspective on the whole thing, the opinions I have formed as a little bit of an expert, not just familiar with vampire, but most of the World of Darkness game lines. Not to mention my cultural biases from living as just a silly little guy in a silly little world. So while I have
not being silly, I mean, look at this all. He's got plenty of fish. I'm sure he's a very silly man. These all just piranhas? 3 piranha statues in the back. That's certainly something. Why does he need 3? I feel like 1 should suffice. But no, the man's decided 3. 3's good enough. He needs at least that much. And he's got a little, is that a knight? That's a little crusader knight as well. Epic. He has a mug of himself. He does? Like, is that supposed to? Okay, I feel like that's a picture. Oh no, he does. It's right. It's right up there. I see it right next to the name. I somehow had missed that. He's maybe a tad bit full of himself, just a little bit.
I've done my best, trudging through dozens of sourcebooks and wikis and online posts to recollect the key points on the timeline for you. Despite this video's length, most things I will not be able to cover. You have to think of this as mythology that slowly transitions into highly propagandized and edited history. You have to be aware that none of what I tell you may be truly what happened. And the farther back we go, the truer that untruth is. Starting with Cain. According to the best-selling book known as the Bible, Cain was the first guy who murdered someone. That someone being his brother Abel, of whom he was jealous. He then lied to God about it and got indignant when God called him out.
Oh yeah,
so
Cain literally said "nuh-uh" in the Bible. He did the equivalent of just going "nuh-uh." Like, bro, what do you mean "nuh-uh"? Kind of goofy when you think about it, but you know, I guess it is what it is. You know, humanity was different back in the day according to the Bible. Very, very indignant, as he said. How are you doing, Shoko, by the way? I hope you are doing fantastic, Shoko bro. Shoko bro. I forget that you're referred to as Shoko bro from now on.
Went, you know what, you little shit, I'm just gonna curse you for eternity. There wasn't that many people back then. He could afford to micromanage a little bit. But of course, that's only one story.
That's good.
The most commonly retold one is that God demanded sacrifices. And while Cain offered the products of harvest and forage, Abel offered his most prized cattle. Cain saw this, thought, you can do that? And decided to sacrifice Abel to God, because that follows. Surely, man would be the most prized of cattle. This may...
Oh goodness, it's like, that's just straight up like, oh, you can do that? You're referred to as whatever people feel like. Hope you're good as well. I'm doing fine. I'm gonna be doing a bit brain foggy if we try to go through these entire 3 hours, but it'll be fun. It'll be fun. We're learning lore, all right? We're learning the lore, and we're hopefully not gonna be brain slogged by it. But it is interesting. Also, you guys kind of can't see it, but like, there's like, I think the names of different characters are gonna show up there in the corner, and I'm sorry because I'm gonna be blocking it. Even if I try to hide away a little bit, it's still not enough. I guess I couldn't move myself over here, you know? There we go. I think that'll be fine. I'll just stay over here for a little while and see how this goes.
May have been because he was jealous at Abel's superior sacrifice, or because God favored Abel, or because Cain loved God so much he wanted to sacrifice the thing he loved most, his own brother, or maybe...
You hope I get to the console of sword this stream? It's wild. Where's that? Console of sword. Inquisition. It doesn't say down here, but I'm sure we'll get to something.
Because he hated Abel and was looking for some sort of excuse to murder him. As punishment, he was exiled by Adam, marked an outcast, and forced to wander the land of Nod, which is understood by most to be not so much a place, but like an itinerant state, a ceaseless wander. Another version of the story says that
got
God
told to fuck off,
Cain by making him
About
king
the middle?
of the night, so that he may terrify the flock of mortals and thereby make them more righteous and obedient to the will of their creator. Adam then exiled him out of
dinner conversation.
In Nod,
I don't think that's
Lilith,
really gonna
his
be a
dad's
thing.
ex-wife, which is true, by the way. That shit is part of like biblical law, but they leave it out of Sunday school stories. God had a wife too, but we call her the Holy Spirit these days. Lilith was Adam's first wife,
not too
created
sure about
as
that.
his equal, but she was
I don't know enough about religion. I should, theoretically, be a little bit more well-versed with it than most, but not sure if that's true or not. It's not really yet. Made up medieval stuff, yeah, it's kind of what it's sounding like. Like, I know that I think technically Lilith is part of Jewish religion. It's not within the Catholic one, I think, right? Lilith being like the first woman, and then Eve coming along from Adam's rib that time instead of like being a separate individual being, I think. Maybe, I don't remember all that much. I know that Lilith is kind of a thing, but it's not official Christian canon. And I think technically as well, I don't know if Cain ever has children. I'm pretty, like, obviously Eve and Adam have like more children within like biblical canon because that's how humanity kind of exists, but bleh, whatever. You're not sure if it's the lore is perfect lore. You think it's a lot of decanonizing? Yeah.
And had desires and a personality of her own, which is why God created Eve from Adam's rib to be an obedient and...
Lilith was a Sumerian demon recontextualized in Jewish medieval texts. Gotcha, none. Gotcha.
somewhat stupid wife. In fact, so obedient and stupid that she ate the apple the snake offered, which she was then blamed for, even though she had been created to do that. This is what they made her like. See, this is what happens when you deprive women of education and deny them reasoning skills. You get cast out of paradise. Patriarchy is the original sin. And Lilith saw this young man and thought, he has the aura of someone who killed a human, but that's not possible, as humans cannot kill humans. Only God can kill a human. This must mean this young man...
You think Twitch is broken? Oh no, Shokobro, I'm dual streaming. I'm streaming on here, Twitch and YouTube. That's why you don't see Nun's messages. I still haven't figured out a way to get them both to pop up on the screen, at least, so yeah, that's why. I figured that not everybody that watches me over on Twitch knows this yet, but yeah, I'm streaming on both. You'll probably won't have to worry about that whenever I figure out how to put both chats on the screen.
is somehow God or God-related. So she took him in, and of course they ended up fucking. Lilith, being equal to Adam, had magical powers as Cain's father did, but quite different ones, and indeed ones that seemed to Cain much more powerful than those of his crusty patriarch. He learned from her in a ritual where she fed him her blood and put him into a world-shattering trance that involved total ego death and just like spirals and rainbows. And in that trance, he was visited by 4 guys who were angels,
how are you doing?
all of whom offered him the opportunity to repent for the sin of having murdered his brother and reject the illumination he was experiencing. Cain decided not to do that. So the guy named Michael cursed him and his blood never to walk in the sun.
Damn. Okay, so that's how that happened. So what, do all of the angels like give him an individual curse? Can you imagine that? Just 4 angels walk up to you and they're like, listen, listen, listen. You can repent, okay? And we'll forgive you, and it's all good. And he's just like, no. Like, bro, like, what do you even, just, okay, curse be upon ye, I guess. Good, and me, I'm doing all right. Learning lore.
A guy named Raphael cursed him and his blood to be hurt by the sun.
Supposedly,
and the
right,
guy named
supposedly.
Uriel cursed him and his blood to become dependent on the blood of man to remain alive, and thus be shunned by all the world forever as a monster. The 4th guy, Gabriel, went, look, man, the other guys, they're really fucking mad, dude. And you messed up, man. You really did. But, bruv, I don't want to be as much of a meanie, you know what I'm saying? And frankly, I can't come up with another curse. All of these seem pretty sun-themed. Well, except for Uriel's, but he's always a bit special. And I feel like we've sort of exhausted that as a theme. But then I can't copy Uriel, you know, he doesn't respond well to it. And then I also don't want to open like a whole new can of beans at the end of this story. So I'm just going to tell you that there is a path of redemption for you, and all who follow you as well. You just got to find it and, you know, become so holier than even the most holiest of humans. And then Cain awakened.
I mean, that's, you know, that's kind of nice, I guess. Just telling him, hey, there's still a way. There's still a way, okay? I don't want to be an a-hole. There's still a way for you to be chill with divinity, I guess. What kind of BS is that, though? You don't even get told. You just get told, there's a path. There's a way. Supposedly, this is what went down.
Over a period of time, developed immense magical powers in his own right. These magical powers would later become known as the disciplines, the original powers of the vampiric clans. He didn't make...
Do human... Freaking Choco Bro being like, do angels just hate humans and just try to sucker punch us? No, this is just meant to be a curse on him. Because, you know, why have... Because at this point, Cain's, you know, in the lore of, you know, supposedly, right? This is all, I guess, conjecture in the story. It is, at this point, has the powers of vampires, but without the downside of vampires. So they're basically, yeah, you can feed without killing as well. There's also that. But, like, you know, at this point, I imagine prior still, or I guess currently, he's getting cursed with the downsides of vampirism. So, like, previously to that, he's like just ultra vampire. But it punishes everyone else. Kinda, sort of. Yes and no. I mean, it's like saying that, like, us needing to eat other animals is a punish. I guess technically it is. Never mind. I was gonna say, like, oh, you know, that's like saying us needing to go and hunt food and eat is a punishment, but quite like, literally within biblical, like, I guess, even though we're obviously straying into the world of darkness's own interpretation of stuff, technically that is what happened when humanity got kicked out of the Garden of Eden. So yeah. Like, it technically, yeah, it's a punishment for them that affects us. That's kind of how this goes down.
Like all of them, many disciplines, of course, were developed by other vampires later down the line, but the main ones, animalism, auspex, celerity, dominate, fortitude, obfuscate, potence, presence, and protean, that's Cain. Eventually he realized that Lilith was limiting his potential, controlling him, trying to keep him a slave for herself, whether out of loneliness or malice. So he used his powers to break free of her bond and went back to wandering. Now, a couple things. We know for a very factual fact that a lot of this is very metaphorical. It is canon in the world of darkness that the world is incredibly ancient, and like before this, or maybe during this, the werewolves were doing their whole tyranny bit. So the biblical story doesn't fit a biblical time frame exactly. And Cain and Abel were not among the first humans, definitely. And Cain definitely was not the first murderer.
Wait. So you're telling me there were other okay, now we're this is I think this is part of that stuff where I just have to hold on to stuff and just wait for the questionings later. Because what do you mean? Now we're possibly thinking about this through the lens of like, they're not the first people? Maybe they're the first special people? Maybe? Unsure. Unsure. We're gonna hopefully learn that stuff in another video. That's already confusing. And werewolves are already a thing, so there's that.
Several ways of viewing this, one of which is the mage perspective. In this story, the biblical characters are not just humans, but mages, awakened masters of reality, or certainly Adam and Lilith were, and Cain and Abel were
the history of other supernaturals contradicts the Bible stuff heavily. Yeah, I guess that's part of, like, the issue, or I guess one of the issues we're gonna have with this, like, with the canon of this world. They're the first, but there are others that we will have to pause. We'll just have to continue. This video is a bit confusing, but that's because World of Darkness is confusing on purpose and universe propaganda, etc. Fair enough.
Apprentices to Adam. Maybe Abel actually awakened before Cain, and Cain murdered him for it. Probably there were other apprentices, and presumably other transgressions. Because the curses that came from the angels were pretty hefty. Let's be like, there was a lot of curse for, like, murder is bad, but that was a lot. Demons claim that Abel's death actually caused the first great maelstrom in the underworld, or alternately spawned the maelstrom as a phenomenon into existence, depending on your reading of it. According to Stygian records, of course, the first great maelstrom was caused by the fall of Rome, which was like a little bit after this. Lilith effectuated this awakening, so I'm thinking that maybe she was the problem, being like a jilted rival of Adam. Cain may not even have met her by accident, but went to search for her in order to attain the awakening that Adam would not grant him. So that's why Adam cursed him again via the angels. They're kind of mysterious, you know, angels are part of the world of darkness, as is God and Santa Claus, in the sense that all things that
Santa Claus,
imagine exists in the upper umbra and the dreaming. So it's possible the biblical God and the angels are, like, closely related to the Fae. Or maybe, you know, they are some sort of Fae. And the idea of it having been the one true God of Abraham only entered the story later. A legend the Fae tell about Cain is that he was a hungry redcap who slew and ate his brother. In any case, because he developed the vampiric powers later, it is implied that he was in fact a mage at this time, which would not be possible if
is
he
there
had
an
been
Easter
a
bunny?
vampire,
That's a great question, actually.
Vampires are severed from their magical avatar.
Probably
Except,
some
of course,
shapeshifter if there
perhaps
is.
Cain was mage and vampire at the same time by virtue of being alive. He would be the only vampire who did not die to attain a status. It's not mentioned anywhere that he did die, and thus he would be kind of the only truly immortal one. Another theory is that Cain was not, in fact, the first vampire at all. Lilith was, and she embraced him. It is certainly implied that she has the power of the
Anything you
bloodborne,
imagine
though he may
manifest
still
in the
have been a
dreaming?
mage before that.
The
Wouldn't
dreaming.
be the last time
Rare
mages
bunny.
become vampires to attain everlasting life. Not the last time that happens. Maybe vampires of this time were different. Maybe they were alive and could walk in the sun, and Cain was especially cursed. Maybe all that's just a lie to make Cain seem like the first vampire. Maybe Adam was also a vampire, or maybe Abel. Perhaps Cain's murder of Abel was in fact diablerie, a vampire consuming another vampire's soul and obtaining their power. Which is a special kind of murder. That's like murder plus. That is curse territory.
Maybe it's
Lilith
just furry,
embraced him a second time into her own brood. There are certain types of vampires who do this, and they just
bro, I was told yesterday that in canon, the werewolves made furries a thing.
happen to be demon-blooded and of unknown origin, that falls sort of outside of the narrative of Cain being the first vampire. Maybe God was the first vampire. People in vampire lore certainly believe these things. There are groups which hold Lilith to be the real first vampire. Cappadocius, who was distinguished among his cohort in that he was highly educated, certainly did believe he could and would one day diabolarize God. Which all begs the question...
That's crazy talk. That is... you have to be a special kind of, like, up in huffing your own gas, so to speak, to believe you're gonna diabolarize, like, God. Oh my God. It's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna eat God's soul. Huh? Correct. Just what kind of individual do you have to be to reach that kind of pride?
Given that Lilith attributed diablerie only to God, who was this God character? Was he the patriarch, the Cain of an earlier vampiric social order? Something that bears mentioning, I think, is the tale of the Bloody Man, which is the origin story the Garou have for Cain. The werewolves hold that early man was wild, and in fact bound to the cosmic force of the wild, which made the cosmic force of the Weaver jealous, because she claimed humanity for herself. She captured a wandering young man and spun him into her web of power and stasis, making it so he would never die. The worm was angered by this and decided to consume him.
Oh, Space Gator, hail to thee. We're learning lore.
Covered in his blood,
it's very
which is
confusing.
why vampires bear the stench of the worm, even though they are creatures of the Weaver. He was then given pretty much the same curses, except not by angels, but by the sun and the earth. The injuries he inflicted on the worm would eventually allow the Weaver to entrap and corrupt it, and that's how you get all the story of werewolf lore.
Okay, so I'm assuming all of the factions obviously are gonna have their own interpretations of each other's, like, origin stories, and that's why he's, like, explaining 7 potential, like, first vampires and whatnot. Like, I think that's just... it makes sense. Makes sense, because, like, of course, all of these ancient groups are gonna be like, oh yeah, this is how things went down. Just like in the Underworld. I guess, yeah. Just like the Underworld having their own version of, like, who Cain is and what happened when Cain got vampirized, immortalized. I don't know how to phrase that, really. When Cain got caned. Oh, the movies. I don't know about the movies. I don't know what the Underworld movies are.
This does paint vampires as a distinct offshoot of humanity, beings with which the Garou have nothing in common. Vampires, I mean, obviously the Garou are half human. But of course they would want to differentiate themselves from, like, the worm-tainted parasites, wouldn't they?
Ew,
all we
worms.
really know is that all this happened very, very, very far in the distant past, prehistory, and after Cain left Lilith, he went back to wandering the land for an indeterminate but probably fairly long period of time.
He went.
Until he decided to settle down. It's lonely out there in the wilderness, honestly. The one time he had embraced offspring was 2 lovers, whose mutual adoration he wished to preserve for all eternity. However, when the lovers realized they could bear no children, they killed themselves by meeting the sun. Cain was kind of put off the idea of embracing by this. Even though he had seen many places and learned many things,
I gotta watch some of the
Cain
movies,
desired
Choco
the
Bro.
company of home.
Maybe
So home
I'll get
is
around
where
to
he
that.
went,
Don't know when.
to find that the descendants of his younger brother Seth, who is probably not the vampire set, but who knows, had settled a city named Ubar. With his immense power and the legends that accompanied him, Cain quickly became a prominent citizen of Ubar. He had great knowledge and expertise that he shared freely, and so one day, the wise king of Ubar, a man named Enoch, decided to meet and befriend him. Seeing the truth of how Cain was more god than man, he decided to abdicate the throne and give the crown to Cain instead. Out of gratitude and magnanimity, Cain succumbed to Enoch's pleas and embraced him. He also renamed Ubar to Enoch, which is a little confusing, but he did this to honor the wise king that chose him. Together, they ruled this great city of Enoch. But the great guy of Enoch soon felt the loneliness his sire had endured for eons, and desired a brother. So
not inherited loneliness. That's gotta be the worst. Like, is this how embracing really be? I mean, I know they said that Cain technically embraced two others like a long while before, but like it's just like Cain embraces Enoch after a bunch of pleading because he got lonely and settled down in the city that he then later renamed Enoch. And it's just like Enoch then gets lonely and then he's like, damn, I want a brother or something. And he goes embraces some guy. You're just gonna go on the universe and imagine everyone being weak to mushrooms. But Shoko, bro, what are you on right now? I think you're on mushrooms right now as we speak.
Cain embraced the mighty warrior Irad. Some say this was because Irad was a great warlord and Cain believed the city needed protection and the capacity to grow into an empire, while others say Irad was Enoch's brother, cousin, or son. He was certainly a powerful warrior and became the city's foremost military leader. One night, Cain met the woman Zillah, who was of a beauty so immense that he could barely comprehend.
Okay. You know what? This like the idea of like where each of the clans came from? Like, cause it's kind of catching on. Like, I just kind of caught that a little bit. And it's also calling each individual person like a progenitor. So it's like, oh, progenitor of like the clans, right? Or am I just... It kind of seems like that's the case. I don't know. Not yet? Not yet? Okay.
Zillah above all else, but she would not take him as a lover. She was a hunter.
That's the next generation?
See the beast
okay.
Behind his eyes. So Cain went to see an evil woman in the desert who knew how to do the blood bond, to gain access to her magics, and then betray her after she tried to entrap him in her own web of lies. Which, yeah, is kind of the same story as with Lilith, and this crone, as she is known, may well be Lilith. In this version, Cain embraced Lilith, and it's impossible to know which of them is true, really. If he is the first vampire, this must have happened this way. But there have been propagandists with reasons to espouse both stories. And frankly, it might not be Lilith. It might just be some other old lady. He might just be someone who makes bad choices over and over. The same ones.
You know what? He is a man in ancient times.
Cain blood bonded Zillah and made her his wife, then eventually embraced her. These three, Enoch, Irad, and Zillah, are the known and named members of the second generation of vampires, though it is absolutely guaranteed that there were more than these three. The city of Enoch grew into the mightiest empire the world had ever seen, and Cain was a good and just god king, beloved by all. Vampires were not secret, but worshipped as deities. Mortals labored during the day and served as vessels for feeding at night. Criminals would be executed in blood feasts. Together, they ruled the first city for countless generations.
Seems pretty
and
show, though.
Every once in a while, one of the three would choose a worthy mortal and embrace them, thus creating the 13 antediluvians of the third generation, the forefathers of the modern kingdom.
Okay.
Enoch valued wisdom and embraced intellectuals and administrators, people versed in art and philosophy, thus creating Malkav, Saulot, and Toreador. Irad...
So, okay, that makes a lot more sense now. But, like, it still technically follows through. Like, I get what you mean, Nun, when you said, like, okay, that's technically third generation that are the actual, like, I guess, main people of the clans. But, like... The reason I was like, it's because, you know, like the reason I made that deduction earlier was because they carry like certain traits that make sense for each of the clans, but now it's like, oh yeah, well, they are responsible for the people who would then create the clans, and it's like, boom, there you go. Because it's like, oh, this guy values this one values that, this lady values this, and boom. There you go. They choose people who have certain traits who would then lead the clans.
Valued prowess.
Because I was thinking like Irad kind of reminded me of like, you know, well, I think it was Wiki that said that, you know, the Bruja are the fighters, and it's like, oh, well, Irad is like a great warrior guy. So it's like, oh, boom, Bruja related, probably.
And embraced soldiers and warriors, tacticians, those who could prove their skill in battle, thus creating Bruja, Cappadocius, La Sombra, and Ventru. Zillah valued cunning and daring, the hunters that shared her profession. Sometimes rogues willing to do what was necessary, she was flexible that way, thus creating Gangrel, Hakim, Nosferatu, and set. You may have noticed there's two missing here, and I think this is because this genealogy is utterly untrue and manufactured by the clans themselves long after the fact to create a story that would fit their identity at the time. The idea that you inherited disciplines from your sire was very central to kindred society around the time this story emerged, and I think that is why it emerged. I am personally of the very firm opinion that the second generation, having no in-clan disciplines, were in fact technically equivalent to caitiff. A caitiff, of course, being a vampire whose blood had lost the identity of their clan and thus lacks attunement to any particular spread of 3 disciplines, while at the same time not being saddled with a clan curse. This was, of course, one of the worst things you could be in kindred society at a crucial point long after the story took place, but when it was told in this way. So the idea that the progenitors of the antediluvians were this needed to be stopped. I do still think there is value to the idea that the second generation favored certain traits, though, obviously. So based on that, I have developed my own genealogy. Bruja is great evidence of all this. It is known that Bruja the antediluvian was emotionless and level-headed, the opposite of what the clan is known for. He was a statesman, a scholar, an adjudicator.
Oh,
Thus,
I see kind of where this is
would have
going.
been the one to embrace him. Cappadocius also was a wise man, specifically a magus, with deep knowledge of medicine and the subject of death, an unmatched occultist. Thus, Enoch would probably have embraced him also. Gangrel, also known as Enoia, was not so much huntress as she was predator, venerated even before her embrace. Zilla makes the most sense for her, for she is not a city dweller, nor was she ever. There is actually a tale told among the Gangrel that she was the daughter, assumed biological, but perhaps also the child, that Adam had with Lilith, making her Cain's sister in any one of numerous ways. It is also noted in Gangrel oral tradition that Enoia was...
So, if I'm getting what he's laying down so far, is that potentially the official story that the vampire clans have is bullshit on who's their progenitor, and that there may be evidence, to say that, well, actually, this person may have embraced this person rather than that person because of certain traits that they have. I kind of lack understanding in the before part when he was talking about how the second generation may have all been, I forgot the word he said, but like they may have been like, what was it, like without their powers or something like that? Or their traits that are then associated with the clans or something like that. So I might need to like wind back a little bit after this. You're picking up what he's putting down a little bit. Caitiff, yeah, caitiff. Like I don't know what that means. Basically clanless, yeah. That they were clanless or whatever. I'm gonna be honest, I got confused by that bit when he was trying to explain that. Like that bit was a bit weird for me. I'll keep going, but that's just like I don't get it. The whole caitiff bit.
Supposedly Cain's lover, not mutually exclusive. Hakim was undoubtedly a warrior and one of the greatest of all time. Though a foreigner, though it is not really ever said from where, it could have been anywhere that wasn't the Middle East, he was responsible for the security of the first city. I further believe that, given his truly unreasonable combat prowess, Hakim may well have been an awakened mage as well, of the martial artist variety.
Let me see what Wiki just said. They have no characteristics of the 13 clans, but don't have the drawbacks of them either. So their whole, like, ideals or power sets may have even been completely different, essentially? Assuming they even had powers. Basically, they have any discipline and no clan curse. I feel like that, yeah. I feel like that makes sense, because if they are, like, the second generation, they quite literally could have had any combination of things that may or may not be equated to specific clans. So, like, I think this guy's, own theory on like who's actually not sired, embraced by who makes a little more sense now. Thank you guys for explaining that.
Though perhaps more scholarly than tales let on. The Banu Hakim are, after all, famous for being sorcerers, and the other two clans with some form of sorcery both have creators who were mages. Irad is still the primary candidate though, like, no contest. La Sombra, well, by all means, he was just some guy. Perhaps a fisherman.
What do you mean, some guy?
Definitely a bit of a shit. Seriously, pretty much the only thing we know about him is that he was a misogynist. He only ever embraced one woman, and it was to make her into his mothering slave. His soul was remarkably dark. It already contained his shadow, so it's possible Zilla took pity on him, or Erad thought he could use him as like a soulless killer. Malkav was a seer in the truest sense, an oracle who could glance into other worlds, which made him quite mad. Enoch is definitely the guy for this, but it should be said that Zilla also valued mediums. Nosferatu, better known as Absimiliad, was a hunter. We know this. He was famous for it, he was arrogant for it, so definitely Zilla. Ravnos, Zapatasura, Drakian, or any of the other names that he has
great. They have
was a
different
trickster,
names.
a
Damn
spy,
it.
which places him firmly with Zilla for me. However, there are those who say that he is actually not of the third generation at all, but a child of Cain who sacrificed himself so Cain could pass his curse of wandering onto him and settle in the first city. Another connection to Cain comes from Gangrel oral tradition yet again, where it is said that he was Enoia's twin brother and the two were mortal enemies, which potentially also would make him Cain's brother. Saulot was a prophet, they say, but it's also said that Malkav gave him his prophetic powers after he became kindred. Mostly he seems to have been a moral philosopher of some sort, who may have been embraced by Enoch in an effort to temper the dark urges of the other vampires.
So man was spitting just philosophical bars during ancient times. that's can you imagine that? Just that's the reason you're just here getting immortalized. It's like, yo, you talk that shit.
He's very famous for being a good guy even to this day. Set was, by all accounts, a nobleman, a soldier, perhaps a knight of some sort from distant
Everyone from the
Egypt.
olden days are brothers that are
ways of
mortal
mysticism.
enemies,
Making
apparently.
Kind of hard to tell, but just on
To
gut
be
instinct.
fair, like there was only so many people back in the day, like somebody was related to somebody. It's bound to happen.
I cut him to Arad. Toreador, also known as Ishtar or Arakel, was known for her skills as a sculptor. However, she was also very beautiful, and I suspect that Zilla embraced her in an attempt to free herself from Cain's affections somewhere down the line, but Cain clearly wasn't into, like, pretty women. Tzimitzi was notable as a visionary philosopher of good. He was an experiment by either Enoch or Arad to put their own darkest impulses, their own beast, in another while embracing them, and be rid of them that way. Which is why Tzimitzi is the most evil and least human of the antediluvians. I still hold Enoch for, like, the likelier candidate. Ventru was most likely an accomplished biological descendant of Enoch, a nobleman without peer and of great martial prowess. Enoch, once again, is the most likely candidate, but I do believe there is a strong case to be made here for Ra. Now, it is pretty certain that these 13 were not the only kindred embraced in the third generation and in the first city. The first city may be more of a metaphor for a large empire where gods lived among mortals. And there were...
I feel like there's definitely no way that those 13 are the only ones. They probably, theoretically, are just like the most influential of the group, I would imagine, of the generation that was around at the time. Or more likely the only ones to survive. At least in my opinion so far is that they're the only ones to really survive for a long enough period of time that they've made their impact in vampire history, and that's why they're the ones remembered rather than any other potential ones, because it kind of makes sense that over time more and more would be embraced, especially if their little empire keeps growing and they need more people to do things, so it's like more embracing is going to happen. Seems like a pretty straightforward, logical conclusion. Yeah, I need to follow this lore at the correct amount for this to make for this to make sense. It'll make sense. Someday it'll just start clicking. Don't know if that day will be today.
Number of generations of kindred present there. These 13 are just the only ones who survived. There is reference to a 14th surviving antediluvian, one who never sired a clan or couldn't, but that could be everyone and no one. Osiris, who may even have been Enoch, Malkav's sister Malachi, Lilith, even Abel. If you make it up, you can make it up. The list is long, is what I'm saying, and the answers it provides are nil. The thing about these 13 and how well they ruled and how terrible the ensuing events that followed were, really the whole story of Cain is that it glazes the fuck out of Cain. And of course it would do this. This is the story the Sabbat tells of Cain.
Oh,
the story where Cain is
Sabbat,
the good
right.
guy, and they are agents of righteous vengeance, fighting in his name. The Camarilla denies that any of this happened at all. No Cain, no antediluvians, no first city, nothing. The problem is they have no opposing story, which is why the Sabbat cares so much about this particular version of events.
Are the Sabbat and the Camarilla just enemies? Is that just why they're are they just basically the two? I know their Sabbat is and the Camarilla are like the two separate societies, but like, are there major differences? Is there a reason as to why the Camarilla are like, no, Cain did not exist, or is this explained later in the video? I know I'm asking now, but very much so. Okay, they just don't like each other. Both Wiki and None are just like very much. And yes, it's explained. Okay, I'll let the video explain it. I do wonder why, though. Because the Sabbat clearly wants to, like, establish, you know, if this story is important to them, they need it so that it gives them, what's the word? Not authority, but, like, claim, if that makes sense. So I can see that. So I'm interested in what opposing argument the the other group has to kind of be like, no, we are actually the ones that should rule vampire society. The Camarilla are a bunch of influencers. So is the Sabbat, really. I mean, Camarilla is polite, noble society. Sabbat is religious, vampire supremacist. We hate the Masquerade. Oh, okay. Right. So one group wants to keep the Masquerade up, which is Camarilla, and then vampire supremacists are like, we want to rule the world. We made the first big empire city. Look at our ruler. He's so great. He's such a great god king. Yeah, it's clicking now. A little bit at a time.
It paints the narrative of denial the Camarilla has been forced to adopt as the transparent lie that it is. It gives the Sabbat story of Cain the righteous the entirety of the propaganda playing field. Just between you and me, though, I don't buy it. I really do not buy it, in case that wasn't clear. I mean, he comes to this place where people know him. This is where he's from, right? They know of his mark and the evil it represents. Ostensibly, he is the devil incarnate, and then everyone loves him. And he is so selfless and wise.
Yeah.
And the king gives him the throne.
Sabbat is Cain cultist? I guess like traditionalist, religious, yeah, supremacist, vampire supremacist.
So unspeakable that we only learn it through metaphor, and we don't even know exactly what it was. Because it sure as shit wasn't just murder. Someone who is implied at every turn to be an absolute fucking snake of a person. And he was him? The Banu Hakim tell a different story of the first city. According to them, what happened was that a stranger came to the city of Enoch one night, dressed in rags. And while Hakim, as captain of the guard, had ordered all gates closed in the night, the guards let him in nonetheless, and he came to the palace where his grace and bearing immediately endeared him to all who met him. King Enoch made him one of his closest advisors rather quickly, and only Hakim was immune to his charm, seeing the evil behind his eyes. Cain was in the city for years, slowly taking over the palace, embracing the royal family to be his slaves. One day,
That kind of makes
Hakim
more
and his
sense.
most loyal lieutenants decided to rid the city of this plague, starting with the two parents of King Enoch, who had been embraced in an effort to save Enoch himself, who remained mortal. In this story, Hakim, a mortal, fights several second-generation vampires at the same time and wins. He then
Don't know
does
how
the
likely
same with
that is.
Cain, but Cain is so evil he manages to escape anyway, telling Hakim that though he foiled him here, he will go to other cities and do the same thing again. And because no one as badass as Hakim would exist in these cities, because obviously no such person could exist anywhere in the world, he would be successful there. Cain also destroyed the entire city at once, just like this, by stomping his feet a few times. So Hakim went back to the palace chambers of Enoch's parents, whom he had slain single-handed, drank their vitae, and killed himself in order to become a vampire. He then took his followers into the mountains, created the fortress Alamut, and vowed to destroy all kindred. Now, this all happens over the course of like a decade, and quite frankly, it glazes Hakim even more
Yes,
than
it
the
does.
Sabbat story glazes Cain. But it does portray Cain as anything other than a perfect angel. Banu Hakim have a ton of stories of them being the most badass fucking warriors.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense though. Like that story, considering what we know the vampires for, like, yeah, it makes sense that like Cain walks into the city and kind of, for a lack of a better word, rizzes up people in order to gain power. Because, like, you know, if the universal act he is known for is murdering his brother, I don't think that the story about him being like a show king or a good king really makes all that much sense. If the first thing he's known for is like, oh yeah, he murdered his brother. We may not know the exact reason, but we all know he murked his brother. Like, you know, there's something to be said there. Now, I kind of am interested in Hakim here, because the whole idea of, like, human tries to defeat vampire, becomes vampire, and then wants to defeat other vampire thing. That's interesting. I wonder where that goes.
It's very normal for them. And the thing is, too, that the city of Enoch exists in the underworld and was put there all at once. It was there in one block, implying it was destroyed all at once, which Cain does in this story. But of course, that happens later as well.
What do you mean it happens later?
Going back to the Bible book, we all know that there was a bit of rain. It's not unlikely that the first city
not a hero
actually
story
also,
origin.
like,
Yeah, exactly.
Sodom and Gomorrah and all the other weird places that God flooded the world over, even though these do come from different stories and God did different things in them. The flood, or the deluge, is remarkably vague in vampire lore, even though it is clearly a momentous event. There are many different recountings on it, many of them unrelated to vampire myths, but what they all seem to agree on is this. The third generation were not loyal to their elders. At least most of them weren't. They craved the power of the ancients and saw themselves as slaves to their grander schemes, without any hope of ever ascending to the throne. So they started plotting the betrayal and downfall of the second generation. For reasons that were his own, Cain left the first city, perhaps he was in torpor. This is when the 13 chose to betray their creators. Incidentally, this was also when the flood happened. They're not related, they just happened at the same time, obliterating the first city in one fell swoop.
Damn.
I have some thoughts about this, namely that I don't believe it, and would like to propose an alternate theory, if that's okay. Clearly, more vampires existed in the first city than are recorded. Many more. Like, this is basically canon. Cain's Palace.
So basically, potential vampire civil war? that's gonna be my little headcanon. Just potentially vampire civil war in the city of lots of vampires that potentially existed but were never recorded. I mean, I feel like that kind of makes sense, right? Especially if the 13 of the third generation wanted more power, and there was probably other third generation vampires running around. Like they must have chosen sides.
Had quotas to host hundreds of them as guests. I absolutely believe in the rebellion, though. Not just because it's one of the central themes of Vampire the Masquerade, but the flood, or the deluge as we call it in vampire lore, was not, I believe, a literal flood, but a flood of blood, or rather vitae, which was later folded into that Abrahamic myth, because that's the way that we view the world. The antediluvians rebelled and killed, perhaps even diablerized the second generation.
Oh,
and I think they
jeez.
also did this with countless other ancient kindred. Their offspring, their offspring's offspring. I think they engineered this conspiracy to go out of their way to absorb the souls and power of as many kindred as possible. But it was a conspiracy of opportunity amidst an already ongoing bloodbath. In fact, I am of the firm opinion that many of them were not embraced by Enoch, Zillah, or Irad at all, and diablerized themselves to the top. They were of much higher generations. Probably not super high, but you know. When we think of history and prehistory, we see the number 2000, and we feel like this is evenly weighted. But it's not at all. There are almost 10,000 years of historical events before what we think of as the year zero. And then before that, you have prehistory. People were around. The first city,
True.
which again I hold to be more of an empire, allegedly persisted for thousands of years. There were some incredibly old vampires there, and the thing about ancient vampires with thick, powerful vitae is that eventually humans don't really do it for them anymore. They need to drink the blood of younger vampires to remain lucid.
They get rich people syndrome then.
They're the most
Essentially.
oldest ones. That doesn't work. Maybe that's why the palace was so extensive. Maybe kindred were fed to Cain every single night. Maybe he's the god emperor. Maybe the antediluvians diablerized their grandsire himself. Though that doesn't seem to have stopped him from showing up later, which, to be fair, is not that uncommon with ancient vampires who are diablerized. They just show up again. It's also possible that the antediluvians started the true thickening of the vitae. Stories of mortals slaying prehistoric vampires are not just found in the tales of Hakim being a badass superhero. It's entirely possible that ancient vampires, even Cain himself, or perhaps vampires that came before him, were still formidable, but not nearly as powerful as the genuine godlike creatures that are the elders we know and fear today. They may have been more on the level of regular neonate kindred, which have been known to be defeated by skilled mortals. And this,
I guess that makes sense in the extent that, you know, assuming this whole diablerization party occurred, that would certainly make whoever is alive by the end of that, you know, vampire on vampire action, you know, very strong. Insanely so, if they essentially munched on almost their entire generation, plus the previous generation that came before them, and, you know, just were the only ones that were left after that. Like, yeah, like, the idea that maybe vampires weren't that insanely strong, except for maybe Cain, you know, kind of makes sense. A little bit. Like, I can see why those stories of, like, very skilled people defeating vampires that were of the ancient times were a thing. Like, those stories kind of make sense if you think about it like that. That, like, maybe vampires are just not that strong, or as strong as we thought they were. And then they munched on one another, and then the few that survived were that strong.
great feast on the young and some of the old may not even be the first time this happened. Maybe it was just the first time it went completely out of control. Or perhaps it was once again Cain's sin. If Cain was indeed in torpor, this war may have taken years. It's also possible that Cain was gone because he was protecting his offspring against a feeding frenzy by even older elders. Whatever it is that happened at the end, there were only 13 left standing. Fattened like leeches, powerful beyond belief, they began to rebuild the world in their image. They began embracing their own lineages. Though I think it's possible that some of the eldest Methuselah were already in the first city, and were spared diablerie as favored servants. When Cain returned and saw what the third generation had done, he clearly was not strong enough to defeat them, but he could curse them. And so he did. The curse would always be some ironic manifestation of their worst traits. Bruja, his soul dry as dust, would have his heart turned to ice, unable to feel emotion ever again.
No emotions, fuck you.
His morbid fascination with death, an insult to the everlasting life he was given, was cursed with the appearance of a corpse. Gangrel, always more interested in being beast than human, was cursed to appear as the creatures she so clearly wished to be. Hakim, a little complicated actually, but in V5 compliant lore, his self-righteous lust to punish made him addicted to vampire vitae, to cleanse the transgression of vampiric existence. Okay, so the thing here is, in previous editions, different Banu Hakim had different weaknesses, and in many ways they worked differently to other clans, lending some credence to the story that Hakim did in fact embrace himself and was from the very beginning separate from like the brood of Cain. But that's also not necessary for the caste thing that happened with the Banu Hakim to emerge. All of those weaknesses were entirely in line with that same sentiment for hating vampires and needing to diablerize them. Also, and this is gonna be another tiny excursion, I've said in my original vampire video that part of their OG clan curse was that their skin would get darker with age. And while it's sort of a funny haha blackface thing, there's actually more to it than that. And I really feel like you should know.
Oh, I didn't
Obviously,
know that.
they wouldn't look more African. Their skin would like go black, not brown, because they were exposed to the sins of the vampires that they hunted. And something I learned rather recently is that the whole idea for this curse was pitched by Travis Williams, one of the few black creators working in RPG design in the early 90s, who looked at vampire and thought, where are all the black people? He thought it would be cool to have blacker skin represent greater power. And you know, that is cool. But back to our regularly scheduled program. La Sombra, who loved to move in the darkness and had forsaken all light, was cursed to have the light cast on every mirror to reflect his true monstrous self, or a lack of self, depending on what version of the clan bane you go with. So he would have to stick to the dark forever. Also, I guess modern technology like phones wouldn't work for him. Caden was like, he can't use the iPhone. I did not
No
that this will
iPhone for
become
your
a
boy.
problem for a couple thousand years. I'm really not sure how else to explain the fact that this seems to be part of the La Sombra clan curse. Malkav, who had seen so much and said so little, who desired insight and understanding more than power, would have so much insight and understanding that he would be rendered powerless by it. Nosferatu, ever vain about his legendary beauty, and uniquely vile as a guy, like on the level of La Sombra even, would have his outside reflect the monster that he was on the inside. Ravnos, who burned the trust of all he surrounded himself with so often, he needed to constantly move around in social circles, would have to do so until the end of time. Saulot, with his ceaseless and
You thought they were pale because they were undead? I don't know, man. It's just they got cursed. They ugly because they got cursed. These are some pretty, when you think about it, light curses. I mean, some of them are lighter than others. It feels like you could deal with being hella ugly. You can deal with being very ugly. Well, they're not white. I don't know, man. These curses just be kind of silly in my opinion.
annoying empathy for the cattle that are humans would have to feed only from the willing.
I'm not ugly,
or
I'm cursed.
suffer their wounds. Set, that demon-worshipping prick who loved to bask in the glory of being descended of a sun god, would suffer the wrath of the sun.
The ugliness becomes a big problem
and live
later.
in fear of lights even much smaller than that.
I don't know how, but,
Toreador,
you know,
with her useless
maybe.
fixation on aesthetics, would be obsessed with it forever, transfixed with beauty, and almost as addicted to comfort as she was the blood. Tzimisce, truant to the whole event as he had fucked off to Transylvania years ago, would not be able to travel again without a whole lot of logistics involved, forever reminding him of the humanity he so desperately wished to leave behind. Ventrue, arrogant and picky to the end,
we're talking
feeling
ugly,
like he only ever deserved the very best, would remain unnourished by all blood that wasn't up to his refined palate. An interesting fact here is that the Ventrue back in the day always insisted that Ventrue the guy remained loyal to Cain to the end, though that is of course very much in line with the ethos of duty they preach in the Clan of Kings. Maybe he's so sensitive to betrayal because that is how he came about. Or maybe Cain punished him for failing to stop the uprising. Ventrue culture certainly includes a lot of opportunism. In terms of their magic, these are not individual curses, but one big one, clearly, always working with the same principle. Many bloodlines have their own curses, which tend to be variations of the clan curse in line with the founder of that bloodline. And when an antediluvian is usurped, the curse of the clan also changes to become more fitting. When Troil diablerized Bruja, the curse was almost inverted, filling the clan with the uncontrollable rage that had driven them. When Tremere diablerized Saulot, the curse became about his need for control, and the irony of being easier to control for it. When Augustus Giovanni diablerized Cappadocius, the curse became about how he is nothing but a parasite, and only knows how to take without ever giving anything in return, which is why the Giovanni bite is painful to its victims. It seems to apply to whoever is of the third generation, and there is a corroborating story from the Nosferatu legend about the ancient Methuselah Yima, who allegedly lived in the first city and may have been the son of Absimiliad or a biological grandchild of Cain. Yima and Cain were closer than anyone. And when the third generation prepared its betrayal, Yima fled the first city so that he would not be party to it. Instead, he looked for Cain to warn of what was happening. As a reward, Cain spared Yima from the curse, and he looks like a normal guy, and so do his descendants. Although there are not like many of them, and the main one claims that he was cured by drinking from the Holy Grail. And I mean, of course, the Nosferatu would have stories about one of their clan who was spared from the clan curse. Of course they would. I don't know whether caitiffs are free of the curse because it's like not perfect, or because for some reason they are forgiven. But I would expect it is the former much more than the latter. Caitiffs bear the curse of Cain, but they do not bear the curse of Cain. The deluge marks the beginning—
What? What is it? They bear the curse, but they don't bear the curse. I guess it's because of the whole, like, you know, not having the traits of any clans, so they're kind of chill. Actually, how much do they bear? Like, are they still? I assume they're still like, they can't go outside during the day, right? But maybe they don't bear any of the extra stuff that the other clans have been cursed with. Because Cain just came back and it's like, fuck you guys, get cursed with being ugly.
Of one of the defining aspects of kindred life, the jihad. The eternal struggle between, well, everyone, really. Most people use the word to mean the struggle between very old vampires and the antediluvians.
Just no clan? Still vampires,
Depending on who you ask, it's the struggle of the antediluvians against Cain, the antediluvians against each other, young vampires against old in general. To some, it's the internal struggle with the beast. It's an ancient word, and it can mean many things depending on what kind of warmongering.
For the ones that always pick human warrior when making a character in MMOs.
Great game of chess the elders are playing
Jihad with
against
the
each other.
with the Y? I see, with the Y, so it's different. It's different and special because of vampires. But yeah, I can see how from the beginning the vampires are just not messing with each other very much. In a good sense. They don't fuck with each other, is what I meant to say. They don't like each other very much. If they betrayed their elders and diablerized one another, yeah, makes sense that they're always just infighting in one way, shape, or form. Old against young, clan against clan. We do not axe, we vampire word. Precisely.
Believable timescales in some capacity. It's the conflict that guides vampire society in invisible ways. Most of the pawns caught in this struggle don't even know they're pawns at all. And with this, a little note on nomenclature, right? The Arabic word jihad, here of course with its idiosyncratic spelling, literally just means struggle. Though it is strongly associated with Islam, it doesn't really have a monopoly on it. In a Doylean sense, they also picked this word long before 9/11, right? Back when Al-Qaeda was still known as the brave Mujahideen fighters. I guess it was like a little bit of an in-between phase, historically. In a Watsonian sense, kindred around the world probably use different words for it, as they did through time. Many of the clan names are sort of modern words or bastardizations thereof. I can guarantee you that the La Sombra antediluvian did not call himself by the Spanish term La Sombra in pre-Babylonian times. It's a moniker given to him and the clan after the fact, though it's quite possible maybe the phonetics of the names of the various clans influence the words and concepts that they are known by today. The Toreador are named as such because of their association with Ishtar, the bull dancer goddess. But the word Toreador didn't even exist before Georges Bizet invented it, because the Spanish word torero didn't fit well with his opera.
Yeah, I mean, that's also weird to think about, just language having an effect even in lore on like potentially like how certain groups identify themselves, the shadow. I mean, yeah, because that's what La Sombra is known for. They're like shadow controlling powers, and their main guy is basically a shadow. I think, partially. Something like that, right? So it's like, yeah, words and the change in meanings and the change in names because, you know, time happens and then things change and we're just back at... It feels like it's just a very convoluted fucking mess of a history already without the change in languages and meaning of words.
Made that up. The clans have different names in different places. These are just their overarching monikers, which not every one of them everywhere in the world would necessarily recognize.
Sombra means shadow,
wish
yeah.
they came with
Sombra
different
means
versions,
shadow.
as
Did you
opposed
not
to
know
just
that,
like
Shoko?
various epithets, because all the clans have a lot of different titles that are associated with them, but it would make things very confusing. It's also a universal rule in WoD that everyone pronounces the terms differently, and because vampire society
You don't
spans
speak Spanish?
so many
Fair
times
enough.
and peoples, there's no correct way of pronouncing anything, so long as people understand what you mean. You can say Camarilla, Camarilla, or even Camarilla. None of it is strictly speaking
I don't like that
wrong,
one.
though some of it is a bit ridiculous, let's be honest. It's not entirely clear whether this happened before or after Cain's curse, but shortly after the deluge, the antediluvians decided to shape a new society in their image. So they created the Second City. Allegedly, the investigation is still ongoing. The Second City was much like the first, just without a king. It lived gloriously for an amount of time and was built around the needs of kindred rulers, the same stuff, really. And thus, again, I don't know if it really was a city, nor do I believe that it was, and I might even be willing to entertain the idea that it was the same place. They were, however, quite aware of the danger of a deluge happening again, only this time with them as the ones rebelled against and slain, so they limited their own offspring. Some sources say the fourth generation was not permitted to embrace at all. Other sources say new embraces required permission from the antediluvians. They certainly imposed very strict rules about it. Absimiliad, the Nosferatu antediluvian, who had been one of the leading forces in the slaying of the second generation, came to resent his hideousness more and more. He decided that perhaps he would be able to seek Cain's forgiveness if he slew all his childer and threw himself at the dead king's mercy. Two of these childer, Medusa and Baba Yaga, who again may or may not have already existed in the first...
So, we got Medusa. I guess that makes sense for Medusa and the Baba Yaga, yeah, because the Baba Yaga, isn't that like basically just a witch, like the Russian like folklore. I guess like it in general, Eastern European maybe, but like I know the Baba Yaga is like supposed to be like like an old crone, a witch, that sort of thing. Yeah, and then Medusa got cursed with being a snake woman because she banged Poseidon, and then Athena was like, I don't like Poseidon, so fuck you. Yes, damn. It kind of makes sense for them to be vampires then, or at least like I guess like derivatives, or like they are vampires that are ugly, and then their main per- traits is that they're ugly in some way, shape, or form. The one in the chicken hut. Yes, the one in the chicken hut.
City fled from him. Baba Yaga settled in the northern plains, whereas Medusa went even beyond the great mountain ranges of the northwest and past the realms in which Tzimisce had taken up residence. And fun fact, Medusa's grandchild is the Phantom of the Opera.
Huh?
Just so you know. Now, of course, back then they didn't carry those names, and they had many names throughout history, and they may actually even be the same person.
She got raped by Zeus. I mean, it depends. Greek mythology has like a different. They've got like a different, 3 different ways for the same story, but the one I know is the one about like Athena and Poseidon always having beef. So it's kind of like boom. Yeah, it depends on the interpretation.
There's a notion that Absimiliad embraced them as incomparable beauties, which would have had to be before the curse, and then after the curse refused to blood bond them because he wanted their love for him to be for his real self. For their betrayal, Absimiliad created the Niktuku, a powerful bloodline.
It wasn't Zeus, it was Poseidon in Athena's temple.
And destroy
See,
his
so it depends on the story.
Wherever they could find them.
All gods are
modern
assholes.
Nosferatu
You're too used to that
from
one.
Medusa and Baba Yaga, and they all fear the Niktuku, who are proud beings in spite of everything, and will never spend the night underground. This is why the Nosferatu hide underneath cities and construct warren fortresses. It's not just their curse, it's tales of the Niktuku come to devour them whole. Of course, most modern Nosferatu know very little about this, and it's unclear whether the Niktuku are still around at all. Kindred historian Aristotle de Laurent dates this event at 6000 BC, which is noteworthy because it's pretty much the first time any of this is actually dated. Though who knows how accurate this is. It would
either way, tragic story.
In the written about the first city.
None says that that's the way it went down in the written version, at least.
Starting to replace hunter-gatherers by engaging in sessile lifestyles. There were cities in some locations back then, fairly impressive ones even, but really towns compared to what would exist in antiquity a few millennia later. There wasn't even no reading and writing at this stage. Nothing even close to the descriptions of Enoch, which is odd, of course, because Enoch does exist in the underworld. It is a real place there, and quite a glorious one at that. Would have been possible to build back then. Some suggest that the story of Cain the farmer and Abel the hunter is about an conflict between vampires who live among people and vampires who live in the wild. Though, of course, this interpretation is informed first and foremost by the Camarilla's interest in denying the existence of the antediluvians. Breaking that back down to the individual level, I see an interpretation where Cain's diablerie of Abel may have introduced the Ponzi scheme-type vampirism of today, which we see gaining dominance in this period. This is, in fact, my favorite interpretation of the whole thing. You will hear more of it throughout this video, but this is what I believe is the truth, or the closest thing to it. Vampires were once hunters of humans, and Cain became a hunter of vampires, which allowed him to thicken his blood to become more powerful than any of them, but introducing the need to farm future generations to sustain himself on thicker blood. Obviously, the stain of diablerie in a vampire's aura is the mark of Cain. Lilith the witch's ability to see the diablerie in Cain's aura certainly supports this, though it also implies pre-Cainite vampires generally had access to Auspex as a discipline, which also further cements the notion that they were cative. And this is the point in time when this changes. In the Second City, cold-hearted Bruja developed a relationship with a young person of indeterminate gender named Troil. Troil was so deeply passionate that it made even Bruja feel emotions. So he became addicted to their presence to feel human at all. Not even the embrace could temper Troil. In fact, it only inflamed them to seek revenge on Bruja for taking away their emotions. So it's also possible that Bruja allowed himself to be diablerized in order to be subsumed into an experience of emotion in death. This usurpation changed the Bruja clan curse to that deep, lingering sense of anger. But allegedly, there are still descendants of the original Bruja around who call themselves the true Bruja and who do, in fact, and I'm not kidding, have time travel powers. Some say Bruja also killed...
Where did that come from? What do you mean they have time travel just in their back pocket? Just like, oh yeah, we can do this thing. Supposedly. Like, that's just straight up goofy and silly as hell. Okay, so this is all based off of the idea, so right, like if we're following behind what he's saying right now, because I think he's kind of spewing a bit of his own theory here, is that cative were sort of the norm for vampires, that there may have been previous vampires prior to Cain and whatnot, and that Cain may have been the first to hunt fellow vampires, diablerize them, become the most powerful at the time prior to the whole, if you believe the theory that, the whole vampire and on vampire and annihilation of the second generation was just a giant diablerization scheme. Prior to that, he was the most powerful. Lilith sensed that in him. There was a certain attunement to a certain power that the cative had, theoretically, if this theory is true. Man, this is like just a rabbit hole. My head is having a hard time wrapping itself around this one. Bro, I am so... It's like, hold on. I need like a moment. The void? What about the void? You get used to it? I surely hope so, pal. I surely hope so. I do have to use the restroom though, so I will be right back, alright? Give me a few minutes. Alright, I'm back. I'll continue explaining how much I've gotten. Also, Shoko left. Shoko, bro! Goodbye! Second city, which may have been in the first city, limited 4th generation vampires, and then there were vampire towns scattered around after that. Continuing with the whole, like, Cain, diablerization, previous vampire things. Okay, so Cain potentially goes around, makes more vampires because he's on this trip of his that is, well, not a trip, but, you know, on this little diet of feeding on his fellow vampire. So potentially that could be a reason as to why he's like, boom, more vampires. But then that kind of doesn't make sense, because then why would the second generation exist unless there were more second generation that got munched on later? I don't know. It's still plenty of stuff there in itself to sort of grasp and mush into my little brain cells that are now working on overdrive for the last hour and a half. I don't even know, bro. I don't even know. How do you get this much into your head and then, like, are able to explain it?
Ventrue, but there is not much reason to believe this, aside from the fact that Ventrue is like the least seen or heard of from all the antediluvians. Nobody knows where he went or what he's been doing, and it's just as likely that he is dead as it is likely that he's taking a very active hand in the affairs of his clan. Personally, I reckon he's just not very present in the West and has made his home in India, and he's like stayed there for a couple thousand years. Which, like, India has been a Ventrue stronghold since the dawn of time. Though it's also possible that the story of him remaining loyal to the second generation was true, and he was killed or exiled by the other antediluvians for it. Maybe replaced with more ruthless successors. Wouldn't be out of character for his clan. The antediluvians were left fearful after these events and tightened their restrictions on what their descendants could do. This, however, made it so the blood could not spread across new generations at all, and not enough vessels with thick enough blood could feed the antediluvians themselves. They were starving themselves out of paranoia, and this eventually weakened them so much that they lost the ability to control the second city and their descendants, leading to its collapse and the spreading of their brood all over the land. Personally, I think the implication here is that they all fell into torpor, probably quite violently at times, involving hunger frenzies that tore through hordes of mortals. And when they woke up again, the world was very different to how they left it.
So does this mean that technically the third generation, not that they aren't around, but like if they couldn't hold power to, you know, keep the second city around, does this mean they're technically like just ousted by their own clans, if not directly, like indirectly? Because like if your boss ain't got no power, then you're the boss now. Whoever is after them, I guess fourth generation, just decided that fuck it, we're doing our own thing. And they, like he said, they then spread around. So there's now fifth generation people running around. The antediluvians are nowhere to be found most of the time. Yeah, that makes sense, because like they literally, if they don't have power, then they have no influence. Maybe like a couple of them are being smart and doing things, but like most of them, if they're not anywhere most of the time in the history of the vampires, then I feel like they've basically just been ousted by their own groups that they've created or are responsible for.
If you ask me, the events of the first and second city happened over the span of, like, at the absolute most, 2,000
It is
years
always
in
feared
total,
they will wake
which
up
is
at
a lot
any
of
time.
time, but
Okay. I see what they. Okay, so like they fall into like the, because that's what he was saying, right? That they starved themselves essentially, and then just vampire nap time, and that they're scared that they're all gonna get eaten. Basically, it's the fear, right? That they're all just gonna get munched on by the second generation, because the second generation, you know, need that vampire slushy to continue existing properly.
I would not be surprised if it was significantly less than that. These are beings of thick, thick blood, and back then not even nearly as thick as they are now, and there just wasn't that many people back then to create like a steady vitae supply for the elders. It all goes up, it's like a huge network. It's only after the agricultural revolution and the subsequent population explosion that their pyramid scheme could really unfold. The first to leave the second city was Set, allegedly because he was cast out for some unspeakable crime committed, attempted, or planned against an ally, lover, or relation of Malkav, possibly that mysterious sister Malachi. He returned to Egypt to take revenge on his brother Osiris, who had been ruling it all this time, somehow.
Somehow.
He slew Osiris and ripped him into 1,000 pieces. Osiris was resurrected and became the king of the underworld. Horus took revenge on Set. It's all the standard Egyptian mythology stuff. If you want to learn more about it a little bit, I recommend looking at my video on Mummy the Resurrection.
You know, I should have caught on that, like, Set, you know, like like, it makes sense that he's in Egypt. He's Set. How did that not click before?
Or picking up any of the books about Egyptian mythology. They make them, I hear. They're quite good. What matters here is that this is the schism from which Set and his brood never recover. Of the 13 clans, the followers of Set have always been the most isolated, and they, as a group, reject the story of the 13 antediluvians as equals. Although many of the stories they tell are of 12 disciples and Childer of Set who betrayed him. They often speak of Ra as the one who cursed him and claim that he actually had very little power but was lying to everyone. And Set learned this truth by drinking the waters of death and eating the heart of the serpent Apep during his exile in the underworld. Somewhat suggesting that the first city may never have been in the real world at all, but perhaps some sort of ancient underworld necropolis from which kindred could come and go into the real world as they pleased, and then they Set not in where the door was, but deeper into it. Him being infected by that serpent is almost always the reason why he becomes a vampire. Some stories even claim that he was a vampire hunter in life. And I think it's not unreasonable to assume that they are casting Ra as like the ancestor of Set, not just in blood, but also in blood with a capital B, mixing up his familial lineage with his vampiric one. And frankly, who knows if he was the Egyptian mythology Set or not just some guy pretending to be him. Begging the question whether Cain is also Ra or Apep in these stories, or whether Apep is one of the second generation, or whether Apep is a different vampire altogether that was diablerized by Set. Maybe Apep is Lilith, who knows? I should also note that the idea of Set slaying his brother out of jealousy and them being cursed by vampirism by an elder patriarch might sound familiar to some.
It's a little bit.
Set has stolen the story of Cain. The parallels are certainly common enough. One story suggests that Set was actually the one who learned the secret of diablerie, which Cain had been trying to keep secret, and taught it to his peers, kickstarting the event that led to the end of the first city. And then they self-righteously kicked him out, even though he told them how it works. The followers of Set have, over the years, mainly been antagonists to werewolves, because Apep is alleged to be an aspect of the worm. Being a world-devouring serpent certainly fits the bill. Most tales suggest that Set was corrupted so much by the serpent he slew that he became its devotee, and his offspring must join him in that worship, because only through the absolute experience and ultimate annihilation of the self can one gain true freedom. Others say that Set always struggled with the serpent, which he could not escape, and that he was not in fact its devotee, but some sort of prisoner. I don't know, this to me sounds a lot like what happens when you diablerize someone with a stronger will than you. They start making the rounds in your brain, and by all accounts, whoever Apep was a pretty dark fucking vampire.
Now, that's like a pretty big downside. So not only can you or do you have to, fight down a vampire that is potentially stronger than you, or I guess you don't have to diablerize a vampire that's stronger than you, but it's typically a vampire that's stronger than you, there's a risk that they're just gonna, become a voice, maybe not a voice in your head, but you're gonna go a little crazy. You're gonna be like, oh damn, I'm being told things, and I'm having a very rough time mentally because the guy I ate last week is a little too strong for me to deal with. That sounds like, man, wouldn't that happen most of the time you diablerize somebody? I mean, I feel like that's a high risk, especially if you're a vampire that's of a lower generation than the vampire you consume, or maybe it's just the higher the rank of generations you diablerize somebody, the higher the chances of you just ending up with a vampire voice in your head is. As weird as it sounds. So Set was just basically not having a good time. He's just not having a good time at all.
Maybe, just maybe, the vampire Set diablerized was Cain.
No.
Set himself has been in torpor for 2,000 years, and the last time he awoke, he gave a number of prophecies to his followers, though what exactly they mean and even what they are is a matter of a million schisms. Part of me likes the idea that Apep was actually Le Sombre.
You need to roll to successfully completely diablerize a higher generation vampire. So clearly Seth did not roll that nat 20. He may have diablerized the vampire, but man, he did not roll the nat 20.
But if that is so, then who was Le Sombre? The fisherman made his home in the Mediterranean, by which I mean probably the sea itself. And I believe the mysterious Aegean sea peoples who were responsible for the Bronze Age collapse and who seem to have come out of the sea itself were his clan.
So you don't get voices in your head? Oh.
If you will, because he was trying to get ahead of the other antediluvians. The only one who seems to have had no interest in endless bickering was Gangrel, who spread her brood across the world's wilderness and was never heard from again. I mean, also Salot went on a big journey and didn't really do that much. Someone who was making crazy progress was Tzimitzi, who had spent a long time wandering the land and diving deep into his experimentations of differentness and the reshaping of flesh. He ended up stuck in the Carpathians when the curse hit him, but he'd been there for a while, having encountered a city of demon worshippers that revered him, and eventually they had demon itself, a creature named Cupola. Garou and mages had sealed Cupola into the mountain, but with its help, to convene with it and to strengthen...
Wait, vampires can live in the bottom of the ocean? They don't breathe? Hard to feed, though. I mean, yeah, lack of people and whatnot. So, they just chill? You're telling me they just are capable of just vibing down there if they really wanted to? Is Atlantis a thing? Is Atlantis a vampire city? In the ocean? That would be... considering that potentially ancient or part of ancient humanity was vampires and they did all this chicanery, it wouldn't be too far-fetched, There's a bunch of elders down there. They're just chilling. I wonder how they get food though. How do you just yoink up random fishermen Atlantis might exist, not really sure. Ooh. Better yet, the sea also protects them somewhat from the sun. True, because like the deeper you go into the water, like the more dark it gets. So if you build a city in like the bottom of the ocean, you're kind of good to go. A mage faction is trying to find it. That's actually funny. That's just wizards trying to find Atlantis. Where the hell are these vampires? Where are they?
Their connection, Tzimisce turned the art of shaping the flesh into the art of shaping the land, and thus developed Koldunic sorcery, which is basically Avatar The Last Airbender type stuff. That's what that is. This, I'd say, the whole thing is a bit controversial. It's much more likely that he learned Koldunism from Cupola just straight up, instead of developing it himself, and then taught it to his descendants. Some say that he learned, actually, vicissitude from Cupola. Tzimisce the guy had an army of flesh-crafted ghouls, but he did not embrace lightly, establishing the well-known Tzimisce traditions of selective embraces and ghoul bloodlines. He didn't want to be an agent of Cupola, but he saw himself as its ally, the first true infernalist among the antediluvians. The following centuries is when he abandoned all pretense of humanity altogether, including any and all of the concept of gender, and simply began referring to himself as the Elder. We will return to him a few thousand years from now. Now, mercifully, comes a very long time skip. Which isn't to say that nothing important happened intermittently, it absolutely did, but it's all very poorly documented, and I'm trying to focus on things that are important in shaping the clans and sects.
So basically, this time skip is the filler arc of vampires and vampire history. We've just hit the filler arc where nothing really happens. Things happen, but do they really? Oh, good lord. Like, they haven't done enough already. How many years of vampires have we gone through? Because I am so... like, I don't even know the time frame anymore. Like, in world history, I guess technically we're a little bit past the Bronze Age collapse. I can get that much, but how much, like, thousands? Just thousands of years, huh? Just a couple thousand, guys. Just a couple thousand. Nothing too major, right? Just a couple thousand years, a couple millennia. They were just goofing about the first time around. Oh my god. It's already too much. It's already too much. My brain is getting fried.
As they are today. On one end of the spectrum, you have the Toreador thriving in the high-minded civilization of Greece. On the other end, you have the Gangrel, beginning to rule the dark Scandinavian knights as fleshly gods. All the other clans fall somewhere in between.
You good? I'm good.
Which is why our next
it's just like a lot of information.
is Carthage.
Carthage?
But first, a word from me. If you love grand, world-spanning conspiracies of shadowy immortals, you should buy my novel. It's called Harm's Place. It has absolutely none of those things, but I wrote it, and people have been enjoying it. It is a sci-fi riverboat mystery set in a small town on a backwater planet in the distant future. Very
that sounds kind of cute.
Often cozy, but also exciting. You can get it only on Drive-Thru Fiction. I'm putting the link as the top thing in the description. I'm doing a very small syndication on account of not wanting to work with Amazon, and I gotta say, it's been doing pretty well there. Get it today, get it tomorrow, and I would love, well, one of them is fine, you don't have to do both. I would love if you could let me know how you liked it, because I'm really hoping this won't be the last novel that I write.
Go check out the book now.
You may have heard of it in history class, the Carthaginian Empire. Based in what today is Tunisia, was a mighty state that easily rivaled Rome at the time, and had colonies all along the North African coast, as well as Iberia. Its heart, the city of Carthage itself, was ruled by the Bruja, and unlike the fearful and arrogant other clans, Their goal was to establish a kindred realm like the glorious cities of old, except maybe not so archaic. Kindred and kind did not just coexist in this mighty realm, they worked together. Kindred sharing the power of the blood to make the wisest leaders and deadliest warriors into mighty ghouls. The very elephants Hannibal used
kinda reciprocal, you know? Does that mean that because of that, like, union, sorta, kinda, that, like, you know, the whole Rome taking down Carthage thing was just vampires fighting the Carthaginian vampires? And they're like, fuck this.
Across the Alps.
They're like, we don't enjoy that you're getting all shummy with the prey. Go fuck yourself. And they just proceed to overtime defeat. Lol, LMAO even. Yeah, I know vampires are still vampires. I'm not saying it was all nice and pleasant, but it's interesting that is the way it's being described. Where it's just like, you know what, vampires and non-vampires are just there doing their thing.
Were in fact ghouls. The greatest scholars were embraced so they could further their wisdom through the centuries and millennia, letting the city be guided by the great philosophers and intellectuals, as had brought glory to the Toreadors' ancient Greece, where the Bruja obviously were also very important. Except, of course, that they had tried ruling half-submerged in the shadows and had suffered many fatal blows from the La Sombra. This was not just the brainchild of some Bruja Methuselah, but Troil the Antediluvian himself, who was more than happy to welcome the best and wisest of the other clans into the city. Many Banu Hakim, unhappy with their clan narrative of original sin, came to lend their skills in tempering the darker appetites of the beast by keeping the peace. And in fact, many of the ancient Toreador, primarily Mycenaeans, joined the glory of Carthage. But in Rome, the unholy alliance between jealous Ventru and mad Malkavians decided to direct its armies and fleets at Carthage mercilessly, for no reason other than spite. And after many protracted wars, they destroyed the glorious city and empire solely because they hated to see the Bruja winning. Because they were right and the Ventru were wrong, those stupid wrong Ventru who lie and deceive and have never said anything that was correct.
All right, give us the real reason,
As you can imagine, the Ventru do tell a story that's a bit different from that one. Rome at the time was home to the Eternal Senate. In the early days, before the Roman Republic even, the Ventru prince Colat found himself the ruler of an ever-expanding realm, attracting many mighty elders. To secure his power, he gave each clan a certain territorial claim, and invited them to join a legislative advisory body known as the Eternal Senate to observe the politics of the kine and ensure kindred were well cared for as Rome ascended to glory. The thing about the Eternal Senate was that it was structured in a way that only the stupidest and least influential elders could join it. All the cunning and influential ones were left out. In fact, they were the ones trying to get the stupid ones elected to make sure one of their more cunning rivals didn't get the power of that seat. Eventually, though, Colat's child Camilla, known to some as the greatest Ventru to ever walk the night, convinced his sire to advocate the throne of Rome to him, so that kindred may take an active hand in ruling the kind, as opposed to just sort of sitting on the sidelines.
You like how he spends 15 minutes telling a story which ends with, so that's complete fucking bullshit. I think I mean, it's important because it's trying to, like, tell you the main things that each group believes is true, or the story they're just trying to peddle, so that you understand, hey, everybody's bullshitting here, and they're just trying to vie for power at the end of the day. You know, and you'll love it. It's pretty good. It does, you know, tend to be the reason I think this video could have probably been cut down by at least, you know, an hour.
Had been doing. He had a vision for Rome being the greatest empire that ever was or would be. If only the kind would be guided by their masters of the night. Colat accepted his child's wisdom and abdicated. Definitely didn't get killed or anything.
Yep.
And the reason no one has heard from him since is entirely because he's been in hiding out of the shame for not having had this great idea himself. Camilla reformed the Eternal Senate to give it more power, though somehow all the appointees ended up Camilla loyalists, and implemented a structure by which Ventrue would rule over every other major city in Rome, advised by a chamber of the most prominent elders of the other clans residing in each of these cities, creating the first councils of primogeni. Now, I would like to note at this point that the name Camilla has no relation to the institution Camarilla, even though he was the guy who basically invented its archaic proto-structure. This was after the First Punic War, when reports reached the Eternal Senate that Carthage was a non-stop orgy of demon worship and sinister blood magic. Hundreds of kinds slain in the great temples every night. Troil non-stop fucking the demon-tainted infernalist vampire Moloch.
I like how both groups in their respective stories are like, we care about the kind. We don't like the merciless bloodshed that's been happening. No, as if they're not all, vampires who feed on the kind. like, who are you trying to fool? Who are you trying to fool, my guy? They're both just trying to fool the other. And it's like, you both eat people. Or I guess you don't really eat them, you suck their blood, you caprice on people, all right? Like, there's no hiding that. Kindred are like that. Kindred are just silly. Apparently, they're just silly goobers.
Masters of the Barley bloodline. Now, the Barley are important in that they are a hellspawn bloodline that can embrace other clans into itself. Also, its origins are entirely unknown, though much speculation has been had over it. If you've been paying attention, remember when I talked about Lilith earlier, and how she may have been able to embrace kindred into her own clan. She just happens to be one of the major figures of that bloodline, and many Barley worship her as one of their creators. Carthage was a veritable tyranny of the night over terrified and enslaved mortals, and at the top was not even Troil, but just some random prince pretending that all this was somehow a problem and, it had gotten out of hand, but, also unwilling or unable to do anything about it. It wasn't just returning soldiers. Malkavian seers, who, as a legacy of the old Eternal Senate, were the most prominent faction after the Ventrue, warned of demons beyond the sea. Their voices were the loudest in their call to arms against the unholy empire across the Mediterranean. So
how do you even like either shack up with demons or fight them? Like, I can imagine the vampires maybe having like this, like, a pseudo ability to harm demons, maybe because they're like kind of undead, so maybe it kind of just works out that way. I don't know. But it's a little bit strange to me, at least. I just don't understand how that, like, the shacking up with demons kind of makes sense. How do you even like fight them though? That seems a little complicated. It's already complicated to the Vitae has its ways. Yeah, that's just blood. You're kind of dead and you have weird blood in you. So either magic. I'm gonna assume magic. They just magic them into non-existence.
Forged alliances with the Toreador and the Gangrel, even the much-despised La Sombra. They enlisted Assamite infiltrators and who knows what kinds of irregulars. This pact spent centuries at war with Carthage. For though the Bruja Empire was in decline because of its debauchery, the power of demonic blood ran strong with it. In the end, when the Romans razed the city, some Ventrue generals remarked upon the fact that Carthage had effectively razed itself already, and all they had to do was incinerate the embers to ashes and salt the earth. It is said that Troil and Moloch sleep in each other's arms under Tunis to this night. Of course, this account isn't to be trusted in its entirety either. The anarchs of modern nights are fond of telling stories of utopian Carthage, and the Camarilla, of course, needs to discredit them. Corroborating evidence suggests that the Ventrue retellings of the story are more correct than Bruja ones, but the Eternal Senate was itself not free of Barley influence. One of Camilla's earliest confidants, who deeply influenced his philosophy, was a Barley, and there were several prominent Barley figures who took up arms against Carthage alongside Rome.
What were Balis again? I forgot if he like explained that, but can you guys give me like a quick little descriptor? Because I think I missed it when he described what a Bali was. Either that, or he didn't, or he did and I just forgot. Ay, ay, ay. Demon worshipper. Gotcha. Demon worshipper.
And in fact, even called for the war in the first place. There's no reason to think that Carthage wasn't once exactly what the
a bloodline of demon worshippers.
Or certainly something close to it. When they talk about Carthage, and talk about Carthage the Bruja most certainly do, it is those ideals, not the demon blood orgy, that they aspire to emulate. This war and its alliance, organized not by the antediluvians but their descendants, as well as the system of the Eternal Senate, reinforced the idea that the clans would not always need to work in opposition to one another, but could also collaborate when it was to their benefit. Sure wasn't the first time this had happened, but it was a very notable one. Camilla continued to rule Rome, but when he eventually went into torpor and was presumed dead, the Eternal Senate lost much of its power for lack of a stabilizing influence, though systems like it persisted for centuries. This marked the beginning of the fall of the Roman Empire, but it also allowed a new empire to rise, a new dream. 3 Methuselah decided that it was time for a dark phoenix to rise from the rot of Rome and the ashes of Carthage. The Toreador Bechter, a man of unmatched beauty and recent convert to Christianity, adopted the name Michael and led the charge.
Hold on, huh? Wait, of a vampire that's a Christian? Now that's a little funny. Slight funniness there.
Venture Antonius, disgusted with the self-serving nature of the Roman kindred, decided to join him. The Tzimisce Dracon, interested in transforming the very world into a greater and more exalted shape, aligned himself with them as well. They decided upon Constantinople, the crossroad of empires, and it became perhaps the greatest kindred city of all time.
I mean, we already know that that's not gonna last for long. It's not gonna last longer than Rome. Vampires can have any religion. I mean, I guess, but like, it's just, you wouldn't think Christianity would be one of them, considering the whole like, I don't know. It's just not what you think about when you think vampires. There are actually quite a lot of Christian vampires, given they are literally children of biblical Cain. I mean, yeah, I guess. It's not really crosses that hurt them, more the true faith that does. The true faith. So wouldn't they just be hurting themselves then if they truly have faith? Or is the true faith like a separate thing that's related to, you know, Christianity in this world? What a confusing mess. It's just Christian vampires. It's like, oh yeah, we're Christians. It's like, what do you mean?
As they were known, and their followers shared the dream, a vision of a legendary past in the first city. But it was to be more than that. Yes, kindred would be worshipped as gods, or in Michael's case, angels, and they would direct the politics of this realm. But they would do so at a moderate remove to protect themselves, and also so they could pursue higher orders of thinking than the banal battle with...
True faith is a stat. Doesn't have to be religion. It can be anything you believe in deeply. Okay. That's a bit of a line of questions of its own, I suppose. But I guess that kind of makes sense.
The beast.
We're talking average Christian, but a vampire versus actual fanatics. Vampire versus a fanatic.
They would reason about their condition and seek enlightenment in various ways, as the Bruja philosophers of Greece had. It was a city of cults, religious and otherwise, that painted kindred as exalted creatures, established a sort of separateness from humanity, and that also eschewed the more violent sides of their existence. Many of the vampiric cults and religions, but especially Nodism, really found their feet in Constantinople. Michael was their spiritual leader, a religious icon, and in fact, to this day, that whole era is associated primarily with him. He did espouse
serious
ideals
stuff today.
of humanity, but
Yes,
very
Shoko,
deeply couched
you've
in
missed
the notion that vampires
a good hour and 11 minutes of nonsense. It's not nonsense, but sometimes it feels like a little bit of nonsense.
are angelic beings who should seek to
How are you, by the way?
understand humanity, not that kindred were innately human. He had a whole cult of beauty around himself that spawned a bloodline I actually go into in my old Bloodlines video. Antonius was the statesman, the administrator, the technocrat. He designed and implemented much of the bureaucracy of the
sober,
empire,
apparently.
which was so complex.
Man, you're
we
so
would
right for
today
that. You're so
refer to
real.
it as, get this, Byzantine. Dracon was
Byzantine.
the thought leader, the philosopher-in-chief, being allegedly the only thing that Tzimisce Antediluvian ever loved, and imbued with the eldest's last vestiges of humanity when he was embraced. Consensually, might I add. He wanted all that intellectual exchange to make Constantinople into a city where Tzimisce, who were not utter monsters, could thrive and develop the arts of change, and thereby change the humans over which they rule. He was also a fucking dragon. He changed himself to look like a dragon.
I mean, his name is Draken.
He was embraced when he was a little boy, so I get it. Although even if that hadn't happened that way, I would get it. It's cool. Which actually brings us back to a situation I alluded to earlier, well into the glory of Constantinople, quite nearby in the Carpathian Mountains. The Tzimisce had that whole area locked down, but their eldest, who was not necessarily their leader, had gotten in deep with demons, specifically Cupola. And the Salubri, who understood themselves to be wardens of morality to a certain extent, decided to kill him.
Oh.
Because the Salubri don't like demon worship. The ancient Methuselah Samiel, who may well have already been alive in the Second City, the greatest warrior that the Salubri had ever produced, counted among their ranks. He brought an army of Salubri and Assamites to bear on Tzimisce and its Bogatyr war ghouls, and destroyed the vile monster in single combat. Though not without being slain himself. I mean, this was a fucking antediluvian. But that wasn't the end of the eldest.
Pro 1v1 them.
It had planned for this possibility. Buried within Dracon, a fetus started to gestate.
Oh,
Dracon
no.
immediately knew what was going on and retired to his lair for 9
Too much fun. I mean, not too much fun. Too much for you. Well, you wish me fun. Thank you, Shoko. I'm so sorry. It's a lot to take in. I know. But, well, things are about to go wrong for Constantinople, apparently. Because, what did he say? Like, a fetus is growing in this guy? The fetus is growing in the dragon person. No bueno.
months to birth like a Voldemort-esque vampire baby that he then gave to another Tzimisce.
We lost another one.
Yorick,
Knowledge.
who would carry it into the world.
Knowledge.
And nobody knows where Tzimisce is tonight. It's underneath New York, by the way. It is under New York. It is a gargantuan engine of flesh, perhaps trying to devour the moon or the core of the earth or something like that. But that wasn't
New York,
the only place where the elders stirred. Everywhere in the blood of its offspring, in the discipline of vicissitude itself, were little specks of its ancient power. Now here we come to a little bit of a problem point because there were a few major lore retcons over the years, but the story I will tell you is this. The Tzimisce of Transylvania, the old clan, the Draculesti, were perhaps somewhat more aligned with the philosophy of Dracon.
Maybe that explains all the rats. I don't know. Maybe that's why they're huge over there. It's just Tzimisce doing some shenanigans and wanting to nibble on a pizza every now and again.
But not by very much. They had come to distrust the eldest and vicissitude long ago, so while they still possessed shape-shifting powers, flesh crafting had fallen out of fashion with them a little bit. They could feel the demonic influence of Cupola through it. So while they flesh crafted everything else, they never did it to themselves. To this day, they consider themselves to be the only true remaining Tzimisce, because they deny that all the other Tzimisce, those who practice the tainted versions of vicissitude, are people. They think of them as just mind-controlled extensions of the Elder who are under the delusion that they have free will. I talk a little bit more about the
these
old
like
clan
separations in each clan's like own. The way some of these clans can't even be like, yeah, we're all like one group, and it's just like, nah, like those guys are fucked. We are the real ones, by the way. Like, I kind of get it, but man doesn't make things not easy. It's like you can't even count them in all as one thing. It's like these guys are kind of their own fractured group from the main thing, because they're afraid of that demon guy somehow having, well, not even the demon itself, right? But like the others being potentially mind controlled aspects of the other elder and all kinds of weird shenanigans. Literally every religion ever, right? This is just religion 2.0, except vampires.
Bloodlines video also, and I will mention them briefly later for reasons you may already suspect. Over a century later, time would catch up with Constantinople. It had been a good long run, but the cracks were beginning to show. Antonius was jealous that Michael had taken Dracon for a lover, not just for the classic reasons of the jilted and insecure heart, but out of fear for his power. This had always been a problem. From the beginning, he felt that he could never offer Michael the sort of free-spirited intellectualism that Dracon could. Not understanding that Michael sought him out to ground himself as he bounced between lovers. He valued that just as much as what Dracon did for him. Antonius and Dracon's politics became ever more adversarial, and Dracon meddled more and more in Antonius's machinations. Toward the end, Antonius grew increasingly paranoid and wished to implement a system quite similar to the modern Masquerade, which Dracon, interested in the transformation of and by humanity, was firmly against. But
so, basically, the polygamy between these three is not working out. It's like, it's just not working out. These two are just at each other's throats. Freaking Michael is doing his own thing. God knows what the hell's going on anymore. This guy's, what did he just say? Antonius is like basically creating like a proto Masquerade. Hold on, let me go back a little bit.
Of and by humanity was firmly against. He wished Antonius's machinations. Toward the end, Antonius grew increasingly paranoid and wished to implement a system quite similar to the modern Masquerade, which Dracon, interested in the transformation of and by humanity, was firmly against. But what made him go truly mad with depression was a personal slight. Michael had a habit of bringing his two lovers gifts in the form of young men, and occasionally women, of immense beauty and wonderful character. A boy Antonius had become particularly fond of was embraced by Dracon. The superego of Antonius became obsessed with control over the id Dracon, and Michael, the ego, was no longer able to mediate between them. But it was neither Michael nor Dracon who killed him, but his own offspring. They engineered a conspiracy to replace their effectively dysfunctional leader so that they could continue their political games. Soon after this, Dracon left Constantinople. He too had loved Antonius, and was resentful of the fact that something as human as a lover's quarrel had broken apart their eternal alliance. Now it was only Michael, and the decline of Constantinople began. Although it must be said that the decline lasted way longer than its glory, and Michael did a really good job keeping things together for another, like, 500 years. He wasn't
Man held down the fort for as long as he could. Jeez. A lover's quarrel brings down an empire. A tale as old as time, I suppose. What a shit show. This guy was bitter about that guy. That other guy that he hated kind of loved him back. Antonius or whatever got murked by his own, and then Dracon leaves, and then Michael is like holding down the fort for as long as vampirely possible. I was gonna say humanly, but you know, not human, so I guess at that point it's like, why? if you got your two major players that like are very much pillars of the society that you need to hold up the whole thing, like you kind of if you don't find a replacement for those two, it's kind of over, you know. So I guess it's like just because he still wanted to make the thing work, but it can't work without the other two at play because they're a part of the recipe for the whole. I don't know, man. Maybe Michael's just a bit stubborn. Sunk cost fallacy. It's like you've already gone this long doing this thing. You may as well continue it. I do wonder where Draken went though. Like considering their love for Michael, because I would imagine it's still there. So like, I understand being saddened by the death of one, but then leaving the other behind to do something. Well, I guess we'll see.
Diablerized until 1204.
Oh,
this
he got
is also
Diablerized.
where another character enters the stage that will become important later, almost a side figure at this point. Vikos, the child of the exact lover boy Antonius had been deprived of, was flesh-crafted to resemble Dracon after he left, and had their mind broken to believe that they were Dracon. They were then given to Michael as a gift, who found them a poor replacement for his lost love,
Oh, that's
but
fucked
kept them in
up.
his harem for many years, breaking their mind further and further, making them the focal point of the lamentations and glories of the dream, shaping them into not the kind of person you'd want to be an ancient and powerful vampire. In the business, we call this subtle foreshadowing. Meanwhile, not too far elsewhere, the Archmage Tremere decided that he would have immortality. At the turn of the millennium, he was a mighty and well-respected Archmage, leader of his own house within the Order of Hermes, which you could kind of conceptualize as him having his own Harry Potter house, but there's like a whole bunch of them, there's not just 4, and like adults are in them too, not just students. Though he was mortal, he had a couple of centuries on him, but the world was changing around him, and because the magical consensus was changing, the spells he was using to prolong his life were beginning to fail. He ordered his most trusted apprentices to explore avenues to attain eternal life, and one of them, Goratrix, a vampire expert, suggested that there was a ritual capable of granting the powers of vampirism without the very big drawback of the destruction of one's avatar. For of course, without one's avatar, one cannot do magic. I'm talking real magic here, by the way. Magic with a CK, the type of power mages wield. If you want to find out more about those, I have a whole video on them. Tremere and his council chose to undergo this ritual of drinking a potion created by Goratrix. And then they all died and became vampires.
Oh.
They didn't have their magic no more. It was gone.
Damn.
So there's like a few stories about this. The official line is that this
Bozo.
didn't happen, and the Tremere actually do have magic that is the same as the magic of mages, which you can tell to vampires because they don't know about the magic of mages. But this is like clearly untrue, because we know this from like an out-of-universe perspective. The semi-official truth is that Goratrix fucked up, because Goratrix is bad and incompetent, and Tremere, in his infinite magnanimity, allowed Goratrix to live because he had also drunk the potion and he was stuck with them. But there is a somewhat more likely story. The complex hermetic alchemy produced to craft this mighty potion, I believe, had 2 ingredients. The first was the blood of the Tzimitzi elder Gorinich Miesiats, and the second was poison. Which, by the way, the Tremere stealing
What a mix. Here's a thing, and a little poison. Just to spice it up a little. Just a little spice of life. Who wouldn't love their concoction to have a little bit of poison in it? Can't have anything like that, I suppose, without a little poison. A little poison for the flavor, the taste, the I don't know of it.
Vampirism from the Tzimitzi is something that Tzimitzi still hate them for today. Because Goratrix didn't like Tremere. Goratrix hadn't liked Tremere for a number of decades, maybe even centuries. Because Tremere is an arrogant, authoritarian prick and a control freak. A guy so self-absorbed in his grandiosity that he couldn't even conceive of being betrayed by an apprentice he had regularly mistreated. Though they had no more magical powers, they still had access to vast quantities of magical lore, which can be a viable substitute. Also, vampire blood, very powerful. In very short, dynamic magic is spontaneous and based on the worldview of the user overpowering reality, whereas linear magic, also known as sorcery, takes advantage of specific paradigms of beliefs to use certain clearly defined spells. And the Order of Hermes, being pretty powerful, there was a lot to draw from there. They also ended up stealing some magic from other vampire clans, like the Banu Hakim, and they could do this because they were still the greatest expert on true magic among all vampire kind, and honestly probably still are. Slowly, and secretly, while the other houses of Hermes were asking themselves, what is going on over at Tremere? What are they doing over there? What's happening?
How did they not take notice of the new vampirism of an entire sect of the house or whatever? Just those guys, I haven't seen them go outside, in the day for a while. Maybe they're just reading up on their craft. They're just reading a lot of books lately. Probably just forgot to take a little bit of a walk. Mages can be very insular. Yeah, I guess so. It would make sense since they'd probably want to keep their knowledge, theirs in order to be, just a power play, right? Just power play against one another in an attempt to be the most powerful of the mage sects or houses or groups. Typical stuff. I said that like 4 different times. I'm so sorry.
They embraced more and more members of the house, blood binding them to Tremere and his inner circle. They began using the blood as a powerful
hermetics,
tool,
mages have traditions,
the bloodline known as gargoyles
traditions.
from Nosferatu, Gangrel, and Tzimisce, which is something that Tzimisce still hate them for today. Eventually, Tremere announced himself to the world of kindred and said, "Behold, I am the mighty Tremere. I have created my own clan, and I am just as powerful and worthy of worship as your antediluvians." And the few kindred who, cared went, "Good for you. Also, you have no clan. You are, at best, a bloodline of the Tzimisce, and they have disavowed you. You may sit on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of clan. Also, you cannot sit on this council. Fuck off. You stole vampirism, you dickhead. We will kill you."
They did not like him. They really said, "Yeah, man, no, just no. You didn't do it the way we like it. No." Plus, I highly doubt he was actually as powerful as an antediluvian. I feel like that's a level of power you gotta live up to. You gotta do a couple of things other than just exist to be that strong. No. I mean, sure, you have your own weird little versions of magic, I guess, because of the whole knowledge and vampire blood, but still. So it's a pretty big thing to try and claim you're as powerful as. Not yet, anyways. Yeah, not yet. Maybe with time he would reach such levels, but at the moment, yeah, fucking right, brother. You're not anything like him.
Tremere discovered that you can diablerize an antediluvian and thus become an antediluvian. So that's what he set out to do. And because even though he was just a little guy with limited influence, the learning and resources of his brood, which had access to knowledge no vampire could even imagine, not to mention his sheer will to power, made it happen. His victim? Saulot, the guy with the 3 eyes, the nice antediluvian, whom Tremere considered the weakest. Except just after his diablerie, which also changed the blood of his inner circle and offspring, Tremere suffered a psychic assault that locked him into his body. Saulot's consciousness had come with all that blood and power.
I was gonna say, there's no way you're gonna take the guy with, I forgot what his power was, but the philosopher of the vampires, suck him dry, and then expect nothing bad to happen. The amount of mental willpower this guy's gotta have to even, you're just not winning that fight. You're not winning that, mental fight. I don't think it's happening.
and Tremere spent the next millennium in a battle of wills with Saulot within the halls of his own mind. He is occasionally lucid or interacts with his followers through visions, but he's not an active presence in the clan. How could a mortal with only a few centuries of life, though, withstand the might of such an ancient entity? Well, he was an archmage. Even average mages are basically made of willpower, and Tremere was one of the mightiest. Many say that Saulot actually manipulated Tremere into diablerizing him, though his reasons for this are unclear. Personally, I reckon it's because he figured Tremere was dedicated enough that he would end up diablerizing one of the antediluvians, so it might as well be him who would be opposed to his selfishness instead of like someone who might vibe with that kind of thing. But as with so many things regarding the Three-Eyed One, we will never know for certain. Clan Tremere, now under the leadership of Atreus, then proceeded to exterminate as many of the Salubri as they could.
Oh, damn.
And they came pretty damn close to annihilating them completely. The other clans had to grudgingly accept the Tremere, but they were effectively universally hated. At least Troil had diablerized Bruja very early on. This was many thousands of years later, when the clan founders were mythological beings. And then they killed the most popular one among them?
It's like you killed everyone's favorite guy. You killed their main character. the guy everyone liked dead. And you did it. Like, you are not doing yourselves any favors at all with diablerizing them. Holy moly. That's kind of funny, though. That first they have to, like, they come out, they're like, "Ooh, I created my own vampire clan." And they're like, "Sure, guy." And then next piece of news that they get from this clan is, "Oh, they diablerized the nice guy." You know the guy we like? Yeah, he's dead now. It's like, what do you mean he got diablerized? Who did it? Oh, you know that guy. Tremere? Oh, brother.
Mithras, who had known and liked Saulot, banned all Tremere from his domain forever. But their deep knowledge of magic meant that, unfortunately, pragmatism had to eventually give way to the universal boycott of Clan Tremere. During this same time frame, a similar but somewhat different story played out not so far away. For a long time now, in Venice, there had been a family called the Giovanni. They could trace their lineage
Fuck Tremere, all your
back to the
homies
Roman
hate Tremere.
Empire, where they had been known as the Jovians. And they could do this in part because they had deep knowledge and understanding of the art of necromancy. These were not stinky flesh stitches, mind you. They had command over the souls of the dead, with magical traditions reaching back to the ancestor worship practices of ancient Rome. The theory is that at some point someone in Rome had been an awakened mage in the same vein as Tremere, but of an entirely different faction. And obviously not nearly as
True,
powerful.
except
But
Kevin, right?
perhaps more
We all love Kevin. Kevin is great. Kevin is the mighty Kevin, the most powerful of all wizards. We love him.
influential. They would have laid the foundations for the procedural magic the Giovanni family would come to engage in for well over 1,000 years. All this time, they had spent collecting lore and knowledge of the ghostly arts, building a massive empire of trade and information. They were a vast family, dynamos of the economy, always with an edge because they could spy on, sabotage, torment their opponents, and learn of business opportunities far away simply by asking wraiths. Well, I mean, they didn't so much ask them as they forced them to do their bidding. You get the idea.
So you're gonna tell me what that guy did. It's like, you, Wraith, tell me now or die. I assume the Wraiths... Actually, can Wraiths and other ghostly things, like, die a true death? Or is it just one of those cases where the only thing you can threaten them with is, like, eternal pain or something? Kevin is one of the good ones because he dipped from the Tremere. True, he said, fuck that. He wanted to create his own little pyramid scheme. One where he would win. We still gotta figure out what the hell happens to him. I still can't believe I'm gonna have to wait until next Oblivion. Oh, right. Oblivion happens. You get tossed into Oblivion. You just get yeeted there. What was I gonna say? I still... we're gonna have to wait until like next Saturday to continue Hunter the Parenting, so be ready to survive an entire week without that. They can lose themselves to their dark urges and become specters. Oh, specters. So they go from wraith to specter. I imagine specters just are angry. They're just basically just animals. To some extent. They're just ghost animals. They angry, they go around, they tear shit up.
More and more clans grew interested in learning these secrets. Especially in northern Italy, they would do business with the Giovanni somewhat openly, even though they were mortals. Around the year 1000, old Augustus Giovanni, the family patriarch, decided he was not interested in dying and becoming some specter future generations would consult
Understandable.
horse racing bets. So he began courting offers from various powerful clans. None were as enticing as the offer from Clan Cappadocian. The Cappadocians obviously were the clan of death and had the greatest knowledge of necromancy, but the type of necromancy they practiced concerned mostly the flesh. They had some knowledge of wraiths and what have you, even some had command over them to some extent, but the Giovanni were masters beyond compare. So when I say Clan Cappadocian...
Any dark emotions, lust, jealousy, sorrow, they are specters. Okay, so they can embody like any emotion, I guess. And then, I guess like, but what do the specters do exactly? Like, do they just fuck with people, I guess? Like, is that just what they do once you become a specter? You just, like, mess with people? And then, I guess by virtue, have a chance of becoming a specter if you get messed with by a specter? Vile stuff, okay. Just vile things will happen to you. You do not want to deal with a specter.
Was interested, I mean Cappadocius himself. Of all the antediluvians, he was perhaps the one most directly involved with the affairs of his clan at this stage, and he figured that his plans to diabolise God would require him to understand wraiths. If you want to understand wraiths, by the way, I did a whole video on Wraith the Oblivion. It's scary stuff. Maybe Cappadocius should have just watched that. So Augustus Giovanni was embraced by the antediluvian himself, against the advice of his eldest child, the Methuselah Japheth. Though Augustus then shared the secrets of necromancy with Cappadocius, he noted that due to the widespread nature of his family, he would need to cement his authority as patriarch by embracing more and more of them, starting with his son Claudius.
No.
Over the coming centuries, the Giovanni branch of Clan Cappadocian would be ascendant, leveraging their family wealth and influence to fast-track their way to immense power. Plagues, crusades, the death of the dream, and the return of various elders, including Camilla, by the way, as well as major geopolitical reshuffling in the mortal world, marked the period known as the War of Princes. This is a war...
So, wait. What happened to Camilla again? Because they say didn't he get, like, Diablerized? I thought he got Diablerized. How do you... Or maybe not. Maybe he just went away or something. And it's like just the idea that one of the older vampire returns, that's a little... I guess maybe he just, like, dipped for a while. I'm definitely gonna need to rewatch some of this. He fell into torpor. He was... Oh, okay. He just fell asleep. Okay. Gotcha. He went EP mode. It came back. Can you imagine that? You just, like, you go to sleep, you wake up, it's been, like, 1,000 years or something, and you're like, what the fuck? What? Where's Rome? Where is Rome? Where's my house, guys?
In the same sense that the 100 Years' War was a war. It denotes countless conflicts between various clans and rulers of principalities spanning...
He did just, he did say that Diablerized elders have a tendency to just show up again sometimes. Yeah, that's, like, the confusing thing. Like, how do you even do that? Like, I can imagine that maybe one or two make a couple of deals and then pseudo-immortalize or have a capability to fight against that. Kind of like the one that was, I guess, growing in a Drakon as like a fetus or whatever. Like, something like that, where they pseudo loophole figure out a way to continue on, even if they've been diablerized or just slain. Not even diablerized, just slain in general, right? So, like, maybe it's possible that, like, more than just a couple have figured out some kind of loophole or have made backroom deals with other creatures, entities, just like a backup plan in case they ever get munched on or killed. So like, I guess that's plausible, but like I feel like most of those like stories, okay, are either bullshit or the idea that some of them got diablerized is bullshit and they're still running around. Like I feel like getting diablerized is a pretty much just like a one-way ticket to vampire, not vampire death, but like you know just like just not a thing you can easily come back from, if at all.
Centuries. There's so much stuff in here, it could fill a whole game line. And it does. It's called Dark Ages Vampire, and it's a lot more than just the War of Princes. It's a whole game in and of itself. Huh. Some of the key battlefields were the frequent wars between the English Ventrue under Mithras, who had been the Eternal Senate appointee at Londinium, and now styled himself King of the British Isles, and the Scottish Toreador, which was a long-term conflict that you still feel today. A constant back and forth, often with the Toreador gaining ground with the Methuselah Helena was awake, and Mithras and Torpor, the Ventrue gaining ground when the situation was reversed, and a general stalemate when both were torpid or active. In Russia, roving clans of exiled Nordic gangrel went to war with newly arrived Tzimisce civilization builders looking to populate the sparse countryside with their degenerated revenant families. In Persia, a number of clans, but first and foremost the Banu Hakim, fell into disunity over younger generations following Islam instead of indulging in their bestial natures. In France, the Toreador, who had been not nominally but factually in control of everything for centuries, started squabbling with one another when an opportunity arose to fill the power vacuum left by the death of a deeply unpopular Ventrue king. In Germany, or the Holy Roman Empire, I suppose, the Ventrue Civil War saw the powerful elder Hardestadt pitted against his clanmate Julia Antasia, which also reflected a deeper conflict between ways of thinking during this time. There had been more intermingling of clans than ever for almost 2,000 years, and loyalties were complicated, not always first and foremost to the clan. Local princes and primogen of different clans could be stronger allies than princes of the same clan in some cities.
So basically this entire period was just a lot of, I mean, I know he literally said it, it was a lot of like different conflicts and fight, but it just feels like that's just a reshuffling, a remaking of where like old powers were now getting tested on whether they're gonna stick around or not because different vampires doing different things, some of them re-showing up, some of them shifting alliances, others fracturing a little bit here and there. Just things are switching up. The playing board is changing, and everybody's not enjoying it.
Hardestadt, a senior kindred, but not yet the end-all be-all of the clan, stood for a return to tradition in this regard. Less inter-clan relations mediated through individuals, more loyalty to the concepts the clans represented. He won, and this will become ironic later. A lot of Ventrue wars going on.
Why's he say it like that? He won, but it will become ironic. It's like, what do you mean by this, sir? You know, what do you mean by that?
In charge of everything by the Eternal Senate, so of course they would be involved with all that. You can actually play the War of Princes in a grand strategy setting. There's a huge mod for Crusader Kings 3 called Princes of Darkness that models it, and I really like it. I've played it, well, not quite as much as the Elder Scrolls one, but a lot. Oh, I gotta say, I really like the face scenario that they have. I just wish there was a way to like have only...
You love the Princess of Darkness? It's basically a different game. I can imagine you can do a lot with Princess of Darkness. Or you talk about the mod that he's talking about. It sounds like a lot happens anyways, like, It's a whole book series in and of itself, sounds like. Just here's a bunch of different conflicts. Choose your flavor of infighting.
Fae in them, like the way that there's only vampires in the. Because I really like changelings. They kind of out. Fae are my changelings are my favorite game line in World of Darkness. I'm sorry to have to admit this in a video about vampire. Something that was happening en masse is that kindred, embedded in mortal institutions, especially religious institutions, started educating mortal hunters on the secrets of how to hunt vampires.
Oh.
And then, because they controlled those hunters, they could use them against their enemies. This led directly into the time known as the Anarch Revolt, which we will talk about in a minute. But first, we have to go back to the Giovanni. It's now a few centuries later, and Augustus Giovanni is Cappadocia's favored child. Immense.
No, it's not just vamps. There's werewolves, fays, mummies, and wraiths, etc. So everybody's involved in that. Makes sense, considering how much bullshit goes on.
World due to his potent blood, family connections, and quite frankly, political shrewdness. However, the Cappadocian clan as such was a bit isolationist, seemingly disinterested in the politics of kindred. Elements within Clan Ventru wished to change this. They were of the opinion that it was Japheth who was keeping the clan back, being its de facto administrative leader, while Cappadocius spent most of his time with his studies or in torpor. They much preferred the cosmopolitan attitude of the Giovanni, and thus conspired with them to destroy Japheth and his most loyal agents, so that Augustus could cement his position as Cappadocia's #1 guy. They set up a complicated chain of events that would lead to the so-called Conspiracy of Isaac, which involved a number of kindred from various clans. Unbeknownst to the Ventru, Augustus Giovanni had set his sights on a much bigger target. They did kill Japheth. Claudius even diablerized him. But Augustus put on his Giovanni gloves and ended up diablerizing Cappadocius. The last thing he saw was the price tag on him. What followed was, of course,
not a reference to freaking to the goddamn Dracula flow. The last thing he saw was the price tag on him. Like, what? Alright, random thing to pull out of nowhere. But sure.
Nearly as successful as that of the Tremere, but also not as necessary, as many of the old Cappadocians retreated into the shadows almost voluntarily, and thus was created the Giovanni Antediluvian. There are a few things to be said about Augustus Giovanni. He's the only guy we know for a fact that the Antediluvian he diablerized
I will continue to be him.
As a ghost, but he also may be the one where the diablerie was most
the
successful.
Bugs are back.
The ghosting is true,
bro,
by the way. But
that part was so funny when he like pauses for like half a second and just the bugs are back.
Secret lore, don't tell your players. I mean, there's rumors like this about all the Antediluvians, right? Really every vampire who's ever died, but they're quite substantial when it comes to Cappadocius. And it is implied that this was his plan all along. Though as with all these ancient implacable beings that seemed so eternal, it's always easier to think that they could never be fooled. So there is much debate as to whether the diablerie actually failed or he just killed Cappadocius regular style. The clan curse was certainly transferred to him, though, which may have other reasons, who knows. My point is, really, many people like to talk about how Augustus is a weakling because he is so young compared to the other antediluvians. I do feel the need to remind these folks that even if the diablerie failed, right, that he is like a 1,000-year-old fourth-generation vampire still. That's like the worst case scenario for him. Get off your throne. He's still one of the most powerful guys stalking the night out there. If indeed he still is, of course. The beginning of the Anarch Revolt is impossible to pinpoint precisely. Seriously, the official lore has placed it at several points, hundreds of years apart. Most likely, though, it blended with the dying down of the War of Princes, somewhere around the year 1400. In this time, cities and stretches of the country had rulers who often styled themselves princes, and sometimes swore fealty to greater rulers, one might refer to as kings. They implemented their particular systems of governments and controlled the population and to whom it was accessible in line with their particular needs. There were power-sharing arrangements here and there, certainly alliances. It was actually not so very different from our world today, except without internet or cell phones. Well, the Camarilla still does not use internet or cell phones, so pretty much exactly the same. Except there was a lot more clan loyalty than in previous centuries. The clans controlled everything. You were embraced into a clan, then you were that clan. That's it. It arose somewhere within the clan, rules to follow, agendas to pursue, elders to obey unquestioningly. There was no possible identity for you outside the clan. No domain that didn't belong to the elders.
Okay, so this was basically like the rising, or at least culturally, I guess, the power, the way it cements of how, I guess, the modern clans work. It started kind of here. At least that's my understanding. Kind of started here, and then I imagine the Anarchs don't like that, and they do their own shit. Maybe. I don't know.
You would be forever a wagey. God forbid if you didn't have like a clan of some sort. God forbid you'd be a caitiff, a cursed clanless devil, a sign of the end times, of the wrath of Cain, of Gehenna. Gehenna being the vampiric belief in the end of the world, and we'll get into it some more later. Right now, all you need to know is that everything is a portent of Gehenna when it suits the political powers that be, and that's pretty much it. The thing is, the blood doesn't just have like 13 neat genetic lineages. Sometimes the blood doesn't take the way it should, and instead of carrying the powers and afflictions of your sire's clan, you have different powers.
Oh.
Maybe even no clan curse. These are the caitiff in the truest sense of the word. The blood doesn't stay the same within the clans either, though. This wasn't even a secret. Many powerful elder vampires spawned new bloodlines that had variant powers and traits to the main body of the clan, and they were considered part of the clan to give them political legitimacy. Except, of course, if this elder over here didn't like the elder that you descended from, their bloodline. In which case, congratulations, you are a caitiff too, as well now. Mithras did this to a whole clan, we just went over it. You might be a perfect...
Okay, so the whole caitiff thing is starting to become more of just like a way to exile specific individuals, maybe? Or even like entire groups, I suppose. If, like he said, a certain elder doesn't like that you came from another elder, and then it's trying to look for a way to murk you, which... Funny because, you know, I guess it would be more of like a legitimate murking if you're a caitiff then, or if they can just slam the label on you. Bloodline, that's the term, yeah. But like if the switching up of powers was kind of normal, as in sometimes people that came from a specific clan don't really have the drawbacks or don't really have the same powers, then I feel like it must have been like a pretty big push across the board for it to go from like somewhat common knowledge or known knowledge, at least to the top guys, to, oh, this is a thing that's, you know, bad and not supposed to happen. In order to like propagandize, I guess. You're a clanless runt, no one claims you, so you are a threat to everyone because you're a sign of the apocalypse, supposedly. That's one way to look at it. Like I said, because the way, Murger Krieg here explains it kind of makes it seem like it was like a kind of known thing that happened sometimes and maybe wasn't a big deal, especially considering that sometimes other elder vampires would like make their own little bloodlines and then boom, you would have separate powers in that specific bloodline that was still technically a part of the previous clan. So, I don't know. It just seems like another way to get rid of any competitors, basically.
Full-blooded and obvious member of a particular clan, even. But if you didn't know your sire, or if your sire had not made the proper introductions, or if your sire had chosen to reject you without killing you in the process, boom, caitiff. Caitiffs had no rights at all. They were actively hunted by all kindred, and the elders even made a sport out of it. The alternative was, of course, being like a tool used by a pyramid of elders leading all the way up to the antediluvian founder of your clan. Eventually, you'd be a feeding vessel, though the elders tried to keep that quiet. After the Black Death swept through Europe, and peasants, by necessity of the value of their labor, gained new rights and freedoms, some of the neonates from that time began getting the idea in their heads that they, being in fact the same as those infinitely ancient and powerful creatures, not only maybe a little younger, might perhaps be more than cannon fodder in the endless conflict of the War of Princes. They began making their own decisions, transgressing against the schemes of the elders. The idea that vampires may in fact be something better than human, perhaps even destined to rule humans, spread like wildfire. Cue the beginning of the first Anarch Revolt. Many vampires stopped living in the shadows, and that really sent all those hunters trained by ancient kindred, but especially the Catholic Church, into overdrive. Cue the almost simultaneous beginning of the First Inquisition. Mortal hunters blessed with the powers of God and strength in numbers began descending upon the kindred. Those elders that controlled them and often shared quite a few secrets lost control of these institutions, and they were sometimes joined by mages, werewolves, even fae, though such things happened very much on the fringes of these.
So the anarchs, or the would-be anarchs, really were just causing problems for everyone else, and I imagine that makes basically everyone else not like them at all. Or at least not too willing to vibe with the anarchs, because it's just like they start exposing themselves, and then hunters start going on a bit of a frenzy. Certain groups decide to join them, and the elders are like, oh, this is a bit of a problem. small bit of a problem here we got.
Even the Banu Hakim showed up to kill vampires, though they usually targeted the elders, assassins casting the promised judgment. Really, whenever the vampires are getting killed, you will find the Banu Hakim somewhere in there. They didn't really work with the Inquisition at all, though. Vampire neonates, even those who stuck to the shadows, were easiest to root out. They were still connected to the mortal world. They knew people. People knew them. But the elders were far from safe either. Some of them even tried to use the opportunity to employ what little influence they had left to send these Inquisition death squads after ancient foes. The Sombra, who had finally won the battle with the Ventru over control of the Catholic Church, saw much of their power base slip through their fingers like dark water. This was part of the reason why many elders retreated further into the night, letting the unruly neonates take the brunt of the Inquisition, essentially killing two birds with one stone. The Bruja Patricia of Bolingbroke, also known as Tyler, appealed to the elders to protect their offspring,
Not Tyler.
who served them so loyally, and give them the freedoms they asked for. Allow them to pursue their own paths. The elders of the other clans, led by Hardestadt, didn't agree. Instead, he proposed formalizing an agreement that would create the Masquerade, which was of course not a novel concept at this age. Also, he wanted all neonates enslaved. So Tyler declared war on him and all the elders, becoming the face of the Anarch Revolt, inciting young kindred to throw off the shackles of elder repression and take their power for themselves. And what a fire she lit. She actually managed to kill Hardestadt, which nobody knows about because he was replaced with the guy we out of universe call Hardestadt the Younger. Rumors of a lack of continuity really never took hold. In the world of darkness, he is simply Hardestadt. The power of the Ventru seemed unbroken. But all over Europe, neonates started attacking their elders, taking their blood, their power, their riches, their land.
What were neonates again? Are neonates just like younger vampires? Because like this does seem to be boiling down into effectively the young versus the old. Just going back and forth at one another, because it started with like the caitiff, and then them, you know, he describing like the whole like peasants getting more rights, and then some of the vampires being like, hey, I want rights too. Recently embraced vampires, so the younger ones. All right, I guess like maybe more accurately it would be within the purview of vampires, the younger ones, quote unquote, right? Like younger by vampire standards, but maybe not necessarily younger by human standards. Because I guess, you can be still considered recently embraced and be like 200 years old or something.
Sicily Gratiano de Veronese, the youngest child of La Sombra, managed to sneak into his sire's lair and diablerize him, thanks to anarch magics that allowed him to break his blood bond and Banu Hakim conspirators who wanted to see La Sombra dead. Again, just Banu Hakim. Instead of appointing himself the new head of the clan, he fractured it deliberately, harnessing the long-standing discontent against their particularly cruel founder and a unique political situation where many elders suddenly found themselves having little influence. Drunk on power and a million new semi-religious ideologies, many of them originating in Constantinople, packs of vampires known as Sabbats began roaming the lands, drinking and pillaging and taking all they wanted. This made the Inquisition all the more fervent. Veteran hunters had learned much about how to kill kindred. Better funding came from church and nobility. More and more hunters not directly affiliated with the church joined the fray. Vampires were being embraced and dying by the thousands, which is like an unimaginable number today. Much less for that time, when there was like a fraction of the people. This state of affairs continued for decades, to the point where the kindred power structures were so destabilized that the Inquisition was winning. Many elders had been slain, diablerized, or hidden away at the ends of the earth for a few centuries in torpor. The power players of the time were either dead or had lost much of their base.
That's gotta be like a little depressing as like one of these like elders or antediluvians or whatever. You're just like been alive for like a couple thousand years, got your power, and then all of a sudden in like a couple centuries all of that is just slipping through your fingers and you have to move to an island. Otherwise you either get munched on by one of your, I guess, great-great-grandchildren vampires, or you get hunted down by the church, or some other thing from some secondary group kills you. Or tertiary group, or whatever, like random assassin. Like, gotta be the worst time to be an elder.
Young kindred roamed the land, not understanding what their existence was even about. The conflict between anarchs and the established structure was long and tiresome, but didn't look like it was going to end anytime soon. A change was necessary, and it happened in October of 1493.
That's World of Darkness for you?
In a small English town called Thorns. The coterie known as the Founders had been working on a potential new government framework for kindred society for a while. They had been important power brokers in their respective clans, but themselves only a few centuries old. Powerful, certainly elders, but not the true ancients of their clans. And I mean, hell, the whole clan Tremere was barely a few centuries old at this point.
Council of Swords.
Representatives of all the relevant powers showed up. Clans Bruja, Gangrel, La Sombra, Malkavian, Nosferatu, Toreador, Tremere, Tzimitzi, and Ventru were officially represented. There were individual Cappadocians present, but their clan was in the process of being usurped and eviscerated by the Giovanni at that stage, and was considered too unstable to really be a clan in political terms. Their legitimacy was still attached to the name Cappadocian, and especially the Malkavians were opposed to letting the Giovanni upstarts in immediately. The followers of Set weren't interested in abandoning the old ways at all, and besides, this was a European problem. The Ravnos were not really invited, let's be fair about that. And the Banu Hakim stayed away because they had joined the vampire war on the side of humans. Or, well, certainly on the side of against vampires. Though they were also getting decimated and actually had been forced to retreat from Europe and had a blood
I got confused by that for a second. I was like on the side of the humans, and then I remember like Hakim's whole shtick, or partially part of his shtick, or at least some of his story is that like he tried to fight Cain and all that. So it's like, oh yeah, right, I kind of forgot.
Curse laid upon them that would make them unable to drink the blood of any clan but their own. Many anarchs also showed up, though they didn't consider themselves representatives of any clan. But anarchs first and foremost, which made it easy for the non-anarch political elements within the clans to take up that mantle. The proceedings were long, but ultimately amounted to this. Amnesty would be granted to the participants of the anarch revolt, with the exceptions of some particularly egregious ones, who never would have shown up to Thorns in the first place. The society known as the Camarilla would move from an informal alliance to the official governing body for all kindred matters, paying allegiance to the institution itself above allegiance to clan or sire.
Okay, so like the idea, or I guess the founding of the Camarilla is basically an attempt, for lack of a better word, to like end the constant like chaos in the vampire wars that were going on. That kind of makes sense, though, and I'm obviously assuming the Sabbat are gonna be like, no, because their whole thing is we're better than humans, we want to rule humans, yada yada yada. Expose yourselves to the real world and let them just, you know, Sabbat's doing their own shenanigans.
It's funny because one of the founders was in fact none other than Hardestadt, who, for some reason that we don't know, changed his mind completely on this very particular thing. Spiritually, the Camarilla would enforce holding the beast at bay by espousing an existence that was most like that of humanity, being not just dark and distant rulers, but embedded into the world of mortals, hiding in their walls. The power structure of the Camarilla would reflect a more modern feudal system, but with greater inter-clan integration. Much of the Camarilla's apparatus was modeled specifically after the baronies of Avalon and the court of Mithras, who was their king. He'd pretty much sort of won his war and was ruling over all of Britain, and if he had been interested, he could easily have controlled the entire Ventru clan on his own. Mithras welcomed this homage to him. He was, after all, in a way the host of the convention, but in the end, whenever they decided to structure something in a way that he didn't like, he would just ignore it, starting with the position of prince as the highest authority. Within the new system, he was the Prince of London. In practice, he was still calling himself King of the Baronies of Avalon, and nobody would become Prince of a British city without his say-so. London absolutely became part of the Camarilla, but you better not call the prince Prince. It was this drive for self-determination, even among the elders, and Mithras was far from the only one, that made it so the Camarilla would ultimately grant princes sovereignty over their affairs, so long as they enforced the 6 traditions. First tradition, the Masquerade. Thou shalt not reveal thy true nature to those not of the blood. Doing such shall renounce thy claims of blood. The most important one, the reason this whole mess had started in the first place. Humans should not know that vampires exist. It is, in fact, the most imperative rule that we fade back into the shadows and people never learn of our existence again. Second tradition, the domain. Thy domain is thine own concern. All others owe thee respect while in it. None may challenge thy word while in thy domain. An idea that appealed to many anarchs, actually, to be able to conduct themselves as they saw fit. Of course, many already here saw that, in practice, the highest level of domain would always fall to the most powerful and most well-connected of elders.
Yeah, so like, first rule, don't expose yourself. We don't want another Inquisition. Second rule, whoever's in whoever's territory has to respect their rulership. But then again, if you're just strong or have connections, you basically get to do as you want, no matter what.
Tradition, the progeny. Thou shalt only sire another with the permission of thine elder. If thou createst another without thine elder's leave, both thou and thy progeny shall be slain. At the time, everyone agreed that embraces had become rampant, and the situation would not improve if left unregulated. There were too many kindred and not enough kind, which created fierce food competition and, of course, made it hard to stay hidden. It's clear, however, that the power was to be placed back into the hands of the elders, effectively changing absolutely nothing about the way things were.
Yeah, like I feel like that's a pretty big, pretty big. I guess I don't know. Like if your whole point is you want to be freed of the elders, I guess if you're part of the younger generations, then yeah, you kind of screwed yourself with agreeing with this particular set of the rules.
Except that the elders who would make this decision could now potentially be of clans other than your own. Fourth tradition, the accounting. Those thou create are thine own children. Until thy progeny shall be released, thou shalt command them in all things. Their sins are thine to endure. The selling point to the anarchs here was, of course, the very concept that progeny could be released and would be expected to be released to be their own people. This was fairly rare before this. The idea that sires would have to be accountable for the actions of their childhood was also new. But of course, all this is couched in the same old bonds of loyalty and obedience, and in many ways, it made the rule of sire over child even more absolute.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, if you don't somehow make it a part of the rule that there's like a set, like a tradition of sorts, right, where you have to release them, or like the expectation is almost in the rule itself. But like, is there a practice of that is the issue? Because if there's no practice of that, then nobody's gonna release anybody. I feel like that's kind of the natural, like, logical endpoint. Like the sire shall hold on to the progeny for as long as possible, and that could be a very long time. Or if they're expected to release him and they don't want to release him, they could, just kind of kill him maybe before they actually release him, or have him be killed on some task they sent them out to do so that they don't have to release them if they really wanted to be that cruel, I guess.
Fifth tradition, the hospitality. Honor one another's domain. When thou comest to a foreign city, thou shalt present thyself to the one who ruleth there. Without the word of acceptance, thou art nothing. This was made precisely to appease elders. Much like the concept of freely roving peasants, the concept of free movement for younger vampires without the direction of their elders was alarming to them. They worried that people would exploit this freedom, and so now everyone everywhere needs to inform the prince, sheriff, or primogen, depending on the domain, that they are there. Sixth tradition, the destruction. Thou art forbidden to destroy another of thy kind. The right of destruction belongeth only to thine elder.
Of course.
Only the eldest among thee shall call the bloodhunt. The willy-nilly destruction of kindred by their elders had been like a major problem point with the anarchs, though the idea that the life of all kindred was somehow special and exalted appealed to them. Of course, this is an extremely blatant way of saying you can no longer diablerize elders, but elders absolutely still get to drink you. So basically the Camarilla was sold as a compromise, where the elders would get everything they wanted and the anarchs would get nothing they wanted. Aside from like superficial idea concessions that could easily result in an even worse way of unlife than before. The creation of the Camarilla was not a great change to address the ills of society.
Yeah, it just basically seemed like a way to end the conflict and then put down the anarchs and convince them that they've caused change, but like in practice they basically got nothing that they wanted. The entire conflict was effectively for nothing. And it kind of makes sense that it ended up that way, because I don't see how they would have had much power in the first place, especially considering that like anybody, I guess, could technically regard themselves as an anarch and then choose things that were not in the anarch's favor and wind up with these kinds of rules, which is, I guess, technically what kind of happened. Wonder what do they do nowadays, like in the, I guess, quote unquote, like modern times? What the hell do the anarchs do? Like, because they kind of seem to have been almost, weirdly enough, at their height, at least from what like I'm predicting. They almost feel like they were their strongest during the conflict. And now that the conflict's over, with this kind of treaty and rule set, it kind of feels like they've kind of kneecapped themselves unwillingly to such an extent that like I don't really see how they are a major player outside of just doing things that the elders don't want them to do whenever they want, I guess. And obviously, there's going to be consequences, I assume, but that's really seems to be the only, like, basically, if you disregard your life to a certain extent, you can just do whatever you want, and then the consequences be damned, right? But it doesn't really seem like the anarchs have much power at all, which is, I guess, the point.
There's a bunch of middle-aged revolutionaries taking a moment of crisis to say, you know the status quo? We should keep doing that. They were already calling themselves the Camarilla before the conference even happened. It wasn't a peace offering, it was their way of saying, kitten, come back to toe the line and you won't be punished. And a lot of people didn't like that. Who would have thought? Because, Michael's slave threw their penis at Hardestadt. Ultimately, 7 clans joined this new pact. The Brujah were, of course, terribly conflicted, having been the heart of the Anarch movement. But much of their cause had been about protecting the lives of young kindred, who were still dying in droves. And of course, there was the idea of humanity, something the Brujah were quite fond of. The old dream of Carthage, vampires and humans living side by side, it was a powerful draw toward the ivory tower. The Gangrel were not a great and unified political movement in the first place. Though they too had mostly aligned with the Anarchs, there were not many meddlesome elders in their clan, but there were a lot of people who were loath to see promising young kindred slain. The Malkavians were drawn in by the whispers of authority in the back of their minds, and out of a desire for silence from the psychic pain of death and destruction reverberating through their telepathic network. They concluded that they needed structure in order to be useful, and besides, they had old loyalties to satisfy with the Ventru. The Nosferatu had a huge problem with their oldest elders, but their warrens were communal, and they already lived underneath the feet of humans adhering to their own masquerade. Being part of an alliance of clans might actually help them hide from their dreaded antediluvian and his Niktuku. The Toreador loved humanity and could not wait to be part of a respectable society made in their image. To be able to seamlessly blend into the mortal world and its rich artistry was a dream come true, and frankly, the way they had been striving to live anyway. The Tremere were a young clan, very centrally organized, bringing with it almost an ideal of authority that the other clans had grown too large for. Then as now, they were autocratic, as well as politically isolated. They needed an alliance with the other clans, and the other clans needed their magic. It was in fact the Tremere who put the blood curse on the Banu Hakim in order to forge this alliance. The Ventru, well, Camarilla was just going to be how they had done things for centuries anyway. Except now, all the other clans would have to play by Ventru rules also. All these clans had many dissenters, and they became what was known as the first anti-tribu, members of a clan who go against its sectarian allegiance or reject the concept of a clan altogether. But 2 clans were not happy at all. The La Sombra had nigh torn themselves apart. They had killed their antediluvian and were now expected to create a new tyranny to subject themselves to? Absolutely not. Some conservative La Sombra, of course, decided to go with the Camarilla, but the distrust with which their clan was viewed and the merciless killing of such anti-tribu by the main clan ensured that none ever achieved any real power. The Tzimitzi were, if nothing else, offended. They were supposed to emulate what? They'd always seen themselves as an elevated society apart from humans. They thought of humans as barely more than animals. Plus, their antediluvian was dead. They did not have that much in the way of hierarchy. They had gotten rid of some of their problematic elders as well. But really, those that remained had not expanded their influence into the rest of the world beyond the Carpathians in the first place. The human thing was the main reason they did not join the Camarilla, though. That was their big anti-selling point. Instead, the La Sombra and Tzimitzi reached out to all the craziest, most extreme groups among the Anarchs, the new cults and raider militias, those who had been maligned as Sabbats.
Okay, so like Sabbats kinda come from the Anarchs or were propping up during the same time. I was gonna say, like, he just explained, I guess, all of the reasons why the groups of the Camarilla would have chosen to be okay with the rules that were set, which I guess makes sense, right? Some of them really liked humanity or wanted to emulate it, or were like, hey, a lot of the embraced are they're kind of dying, so we gotta stop the chicanery going on. And the only way to do that is to take that deal. So, and for the most part, they're all forgiven. For the most part, I guess that makes sense why the ones that essentially started the fight, which would be the Bruja, were like, hey, maybe it's time to shell out.
To meet on the island of Majorca, join forces and become the Sabbat. Each of the major Camarilla clans also had many detractors join. Among the Bruja, all those who didn't care about Carthage that much, cared about Carthage too much, or cared about the wrong parts of Carthage, joined, as well as those whose entire purpose had become to destroy the elders. Though more Bruja ended up anarchs than Sabbat, of course, many Bruja anti-Tribu consider Clan Bruja to be one of the founding clans of the Sabbat. Among the gangrel, many had no interest in joining the humanity-obsessed Camarilla, and had personal reasons to fight for freedom, pursue the hunt, or just seek glory with the Sabbat. Among the Malkavians, many were followers of the great Vasanta Sena, who had for a long time been an opponent of the practice of blood bonding and refined the rituals of Valdery. Among the Nosferatu, many ironically somewhat elder members considered it cowardly of the main clan to not wage war against the Niktuku and their antediluvian master. Among the Toreador, there were a few outliers who were more obsessed with hedonism than art and humanity, often considering humans little more than materials for artistic creation. Among the Tremere, who else but our old pal Goratrix would betray the inner council in a final fuck you to his master, joining the Sabbat with a small number
That one makes sense.
but massive power, and a lot of street cred for their clan having diablerized Salot. Among the Ventru, there were many who desired open rule of kindred over kind, viewing their clanmates as old and weak, unable to accept that the world had changed and the aristocracy of shadows should remain in the shadows no more. Many in the Sabbat had their primary allegiance not with any clan, but with various cults, extremist groups, and hunting packs. There was, shall we say, a lot of diversity of thought in the Sabbat, by which I specifically mean the most fringe people of every conceivable creed. The only thing they all shared is that they were sworn enemies of the Camarilla and all it stood for. Well, except...
So basically just the Sabbat equals extremist group of all the, like every extremist group. So I imagine they fight them amongst themselves more often than they do against the Camarilla, because it does not sound like you could get many of these people to sit in the same room to talk for more than an hour before something happens in that room. Honest to the gods. This shit just sounds like a mess of a group in the first place.
For the Masquerade, that shit seems pretty sensible, honestly. At least in practice. Nominally, this...
You can't even begin to imagine how much. Yeah, it's like, oh, I like the way he described the ones that care about the Carthage. Like, some of them don't care about Carthage, some of them cared a little too much, some others cared about the wrong parts of Carthage. I was like, yeah, that doesn't seem like it's gonna fare very well. That's what the Valdery is for? The Valdery.
Sabbat still very much opposes the Masquerade. They just enforce it for purely tactical reasons. It'll be dropped the moment kindred rule openly over kind. Promise. Pinky promise.
Pinky
the
promise.
ritual of Valdery allowed Sabbat packs to break all blood bonds to the elders and instead become mutually bonded
Right, I
to
forgot.
one another.
Valdery is like, we're gonna be show with one another. Right, I forgot. That's what Valdery's for. It still kind of seems a little like, but yeah, yeah, Valdery. Like, I kind of forgot about that one. This is what happens when I just get inloaded with too much information.
Feeling not the oppressive boot of command, but the love and camaraderie that the blood bond fosters. The fake love and camaraderie, certainly. It can strengthen a group of people that already trust each other, but when the pack is too internally divided, it can feel as alien as being forced to love a hated sire. Though they saw themselves as the truest of anarchs, the Sabbat understood themselves
Gotta leave for
to
now.
be a
All
sort
right,
of
Nun. Thank you for coming
religious
around.
military
It
order
won't be.
above
It
anything
won't be
else.
continue. I think I'll stop when we reach this endpoint for this little, I guess, chapter of the video, anyways, and save the rest for some other time. maybe Saturday we'll just continue watching and then continue on to, you know, Hunter the parenting after that, just to finish this video up. But yeah, we'll stop when this bit ends anyhow. But thank you for coming around. May the gods bless you, may the stars shine in your honor.
Many of the Anarchs were more honest adherents to the path of humanity than anyone, even the Camarilla. They desired not cruelty, but freedom, so they had no interest in a vampire supremacy organization. Ultimately, the narrative that worked for the Sabbat was one where Cain was the true god of vampire kind, and that the antediluvians
I shall greet El Pescado for you.
The Sabbat would be Cain's vengeance, the sword that kills the antediluvians and their minions, focusing first and foremost on the minions for now. This, of course, attracted exactly the kind of people who would be part of Sabbats in the first place. This affected Cainites who rejected the notion of humanity, driven by entirely different views on the beast. These paths were as old as vampire kind itself. The Sabbat didn't start out very strong, or frankly, as extreme as their reputation suggests. Make no mistake though, they were pretty extreme in the beginning too. For a few decades, perhaps even like a century or two, they spent their time collecting strays with ever more outlandish ideologies. The sword of Cain needed to be sharpened before it could really be used. From day one, there was enormous tension between the fundamental operational unit being actual murder hobos and various flavors of ego-driven cults, and the need for order and discipline. Not to mention the irony of a sect that rejects the concept of the clan himself being fully built around two clans who identify with being in the Sabbat. What emerged was an amalgam of the Tsimitsi's bizarre but suspicious tolerance of the weird idiosyncrasies of others, and the La Sombra's cell-like command structure that resembled both a navy and the Catholic Church, because those had been the two specialties of that clan. It also just so happened that after the Inquisition there were now many La Sombra who had been embedded in the church, but were now sort of floating without a job. In practice, the glue holding the Sabbat together has always been violence. So the Sabbat leadership, the cardinals and their regent, needed to secure both spiritual authority and control the main military apparatus, which they did in the form of the Black Hand. A tribe of warrior monks emerging from a splinter group of the Banu Hakim that followed the teachings of a Methuselah called the Weeping Master. The Weeping Master had received a vision of the antediluvians betraying and slaughtering the second generation and destroying the perfect first city. He was overwhelmed by hatred for them, even, it is said, Hakim. It's possible that he received this vision in the first city before the betrayal. I think this is unlikely, given that the timeline really wouldn't work out. The real main story is that he found a stone where blood was coming out of, and he licked it. He wished to avenge Cain, so his descendants aligned themselves with the Sabbat and became essentially the sect's special forces, responsible for some of its most impressive victories, but mostly deployed against unruly elements within the Sabbat itself.
So like
even though they never saw
basically special forces mixed with the this internal police force is what they do. They just make sure their own group isn't, or at least aspects of it isn't, I don't know, getting out of hand.
Tie with the theological aims of the Sabbat leadership, they became the sect's most influential religious grouping. Something very funny and also famous that happened in the middle of the Anarch Revolt, though unrelated to it, was, and this is true, Dracula. So Vlad the Impaler was a historical figure, and that is the historical figure he was in World of Darkness also. It's the same guy. It may surprise you to learn that he is in fact rather young. He adopted the moniker Draculesti from the old clan Tzimitzi because he was aware as a mortal that they ruled over his kingdom from the shadows. He'd been given this information by the Ravnos elder Durgasin, who you might say orchestrated this whole situation.
There's the boy, there
Even
he
as
is.
a mortal, Dracula was such an accomplished general and warrior that he was able to defeat Tzimitzi ghoul armies in battle and killed a number of younger vampires through strategy and cunning. The reason he wasn't just killed outright was because the Tzimitzi took their sweet time deliberating whether he should maybe be embraced instead, given that he was, of course, the definition of a candidate, right? An utterly outstanding mortal. The problem was that he held real power in the world of Kine, and many of the old clan did not appreciate the implications of that.
Oh,
Eventually,
yeah.
at the point where he died in our history,
it's like, on one hand, they really, really want him to become a vampire. On the other hand, he's literally a well-known king of a land, so vampiring him might be a little bit of a problem if he continues to rule his kingdom, because, he's kind of popular at that point in time in basically not the entirety of Europe, but he's definitely garnered a reputation by that point in, like, the whole of the Holy Roman Empire and even the Middle East, because the Ottomans, right? He was fighting against the Ottomans.
he was turned into a ghoul and paraded around at court as a curiosity, but also deployed as a warrior. The special thing about Dracula that nobody knew was that he was, even as a mortal, immune to the blood bond. He was thus able to escape the influence of his master and become a free ghoul who hunted vampires for their blood. He did, however, wish to become a true kindred. Seeing the political developments with the nascent Sabbat and Camarilla, he made himself into a target for the Tzimisce elder Lambach Ruthven and his sire, the Methuselah Tabak, who had been leaders of a small Sabbat pact that may not even have been part of the official Sabbat. He tricked them into attacking his castle, but had already forewarned the Camarilla of their position, which descended upon them in force. As the two groups were fighting, he revealed a whole army hidden in the landscape, and attacked, forcing the Camarilla to flee and staking both Lambach Ruthven and Tabak. When Ruthven awoke from the stake in his heart being pulled out, he was presented with the ashes of his sire. Dracula then gave the Tzimisce a choice: embrace me and live, or meet the sun like Tabak had. Ruthven acquiesced. Dracula then promptly went into the dungeon where Tabak was still staked and diablerized him, gaining unspeakable power in devouring this ancient child of the Tzimisce antediluvian himself. He let Lambach Ruthven go. After all, he'd promised as much, and he let the matter rest. Dracula then basically became like a gentleman adventurer, though unfortunately he found it difficult to travel. He learned many powerful arts, driving the Anarchs out of Transylvania, establishing a Sabbat presence there. His own life is storied and obscure, perhaps more laden with speculation than any other kindreds, because, and you may have heard of this, in the Victorian age, he commissioned a certain gentleman named Bram Stoker to write a story about him and publish it. That was, of course, an insane breach of the Masquerade, which he may have done just for kicks, because, he felt like he could.
Jesus.
Nobody likes him, though. But you know what? Thus far, he's gotten away with it.
Bro, that's kind of... Bro, Dracula's just kind of a shad. Like, holy shit, bro. He played both sides, which is funny, too, because historically, that's what he was pretty good at when it came to, the Ottomans and the, the Holy Roman Empire. He would basically fuck with both of them in an attempt to keep his kingdom, all good and to himself. So it's funny that somehow that also kind of translates into World of Darkness, where he kind of fucks with the Camarilla and the Sabbath, and just bro's just kind of a shad. I don't know. He might be kind of like a contender for like, I don't know, if he at some point became super powerful, like down the line of the World of Darkness story, I wouldn't be surprised. Genuinely, like how do you pull this off and live? He'll let the archangels take him. Exactly. Fucking hell.
Gotten away with all his nonsense.
Okay. For now, though, we'll stop right there because that is a lot to take in. We still have an hour essentially left. And my brain needs time to intake all that darn information. So... For now, I shall bid thee farewell. I hope you all have a great rest of your mornings, afternoons, evenings, and nights, wherever and whenever you are. May the gods bless you. May the stars shine in your honor. I'm gonna go eat. I'm gonna go drink water. Bathe like a good boy. And I'll be off. Bye-bye.